before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. The wind in Kluane doesn't just blow, it breathes. You can feel it moving through the trees, twisting the branches like fingers reaching for something unseen. When I first pulled into the gravel campsite at Kluane National Park and Reserve, nestled in the Yukon wilderness, the place looked like a postcard. Vast mountains scraping the sky, dense forests spilling into a mirror-calm lake. It was quiet, but not the peaceful quiet I was used to. This was a heavy quiet, the kind that presses on your chest and makes your skin itch. I was traveling alone, just me and my 30-foot rig, my home on wheels for the summer. At 38, I'd been camping across the states countless times, never once feeling truly out of place or afraid. But this was different. Kluane is legendary among seasoned campers, breathtaking and brutal. It's a land where the wilderness isn't just wild. It's ancient, and something about that stirs up a part of you thought was long buried. I had set up camp near Kathleen Lake, a spot recommended by a local at the visitor center, a man named Tom, mid-50s, born and raised in the Yukon. He warned me in a gruff voice, "It's not just the bears you gotta watch, it's what comes after dark." I laughed it off then, chalking it up to the kind of local legend that fills the long nights around campfires. But that night, as the sun slipped away and the shadows lengthened, I started to understand exactly what he meant. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No bird song, no insect buzz, just the faint rustle of wind through the spruce. I was standing outside the rig, watching the last light fade from the mountains when a sharp snap echoed through the forest. Not close, but close enough to send a cold spike through me. I thought maybe a deer or some other animal, but the sound had a weight to it, like the branch was snapped on purpose, deliberate. I shrugged it off and went inside, locking the door and pulling down the blinds. The wood stove I'd packed started to hiss and creak as it warmed the interior, but even inside I could feel that heavy quiet, like the woods were holding their breath. That's when I heard the knocking. Not on the door or the rig, but on the window beside my bed. Slow, measured taps, once, pause, twice, like a code. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I told myself it was probably a bird or a branch banging, but the timing was too rhythmic, too unnatural. I lay awake for hours, straining to hear anything else. The wind outside shifted, carrying with it a sharp scent, something like burnt pine mixed with decay. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a forest fire far away, or an animal carcass rotting in the underbrush. But the smell grew stronger, invading my nostrils until I was gagging, and then it was gone. Silence. Again. Morning brought light and false relief. I convinced myself that nerves had gotten the better of me, that the isolation was messing with my head. I packed a thermos of coffee and headed down to the lake, hoping the crystal clear water and the reflection of the snow-capped mountains would wash away the unease. That's when I met her. Mara. She was about my age, rugged, with short-cropped hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen more than a few winters. She was camped a few sites down in a converted camper van covered in stickers from road trips across Canada and Alaska. We talked briefly about the park and the trails, and she warned me to be cautious if I planned on hiking after dark. "There's something out here," she said quietly, her voice dropping. "Not just bears or wolves. Something that moves when the world's asleep." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, but I smiled and nodded, trying to sound brave. Deep down, though, I felt a strange connection, like we shared a secret no one else knew. Mara had the look of someone who'd come close to the edge and stepped back just in time. That afternoon, I decided to explore a trail Mara recommended, one that hugged the edge of the park's vast glaciers and led to an old ranger's lookout long since abandoned. The path was rugged, the kind of trail that tests your balance and willpower. As I walked, the forest closed in tighter around me, shadows thickening beneath the towering firs. The air turned colder despite the sun still hanging high. I kept hearing faint noises, a twig snapping, a distant howl, the scrape of branches. Each time I stopped, the sounds would vanish, swallowed by the oppressive quiet. I told myself it was just the wind or wildlife, normal things, but my pulse quickened with each step. When I reached the lookout, a rickety wooden platform perched high on a rocky outcrop, I could see the whole valley spread out below me. The ice gleamed like shards of glass, and the peaks were dusted with snow. For a moment, the sheer beauty stole my breath. Then I heard it, low, guttural chanting, echoing faintly through the trees below. I froze, straining to pinpoint where it came from. It wasn't human, not quite, but definitely something alive. My mind scrambled for logic, but there was none. Just that primal, sinking dread in my gut. I wanted to turn and run, but forced myself to stay, to prove I wasn't afraid. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so thick it seemed to press against my ears. Then a sharp crack. The sound of branches breaking nearby shattered the stillness. I didn't wait to see what made it. Heart pounding, I ran back down the trail, the trees blurring past, the shadows seeming to reach for me. Back at camp, Mara was waiting outside her van, her eyes dark and serious. "You heard it," she said simply. I nodded, words failing me. "That chanting," she explained, "is tied to old stories here. The First Nations talk about spirits guarding the land. They warn against wandering at night because those spirits don't like trespassers." I wanted to laugh, to call it superstition, but the fear in her voice was contagious. For the first time, I felt the deep, ancient weight of this place. Not just the cold or the mountains, but something alive and watching. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak and sigh of the rig felt amplified. The wind's breath was colder, and the knocking returned, faster this time, more insistent. I wanted to look, to confront whatever it was, but my limbs wouldn't obey. By dawn, I was exhausted and raw with fear, but something inside me had shifted. I realized that out here, in this land carved by glaciers and guarded by invisible eyes, you don't just survive, you respect. You listen to the whispers on the wind, to the stories carved into the stones, and you carry the weight of those lessons home, so you don't forget what's lurking just beyond the light. I left Kluane that day, changed. The mountains faded behind me, but their shadow stayed. A quiet reminder that some places hold secrets you can't outrun. And sometimes, the greatest danger isn't the wildlife or the weather. It's the silence waiting in the dark, waiting for you to hear it. The road out of Kluane felt longer than the road in, stretched thin by the weight of everything I'd seen, heard, and felt. My rig rolled past towering spruce and frozen lakes, but my mind kept drifting back to that last night. The knocking at the window, the scent of burnt pine mingled with decay, the eerie chanting echoing in the mountains. I tried to tell myself it was all a trick of the mind, a wilderness-induced hallucination fueled by isolation. But deep inside, a knot tightened in my chest. That ancient whispered warning Mara shared about spirits guarding the land, about trespassers who stir their anger. Driving through the endless Yukon wilderness, I found myself replaying the moments when fear crept in quietly, like a slow tide pulling me beneath. That subtle feeling of being watched, the way the wind didn't just move but whispered, carried voices I couldn't quite understand but could never ignore. And then there was Mara. Before I left, she handed me a small, worn journal bound in cracked leather. "For the road," she said, her voice softer now. "It's not just a book, it's a way to remember, to stay grounded. When you're out here, the stories keep you safe." I accepted it, running my fingers over the faded cover, feeling the weight of her warning and the history folded into its pages. That night, as I pulled into a small roadside campground miles from Kluane's grasp, I opened the journal under the dim light of my rig's lamp. Inside, the pages were filled with stories, tales of campers who'd vanished, strange figures glimpsed through fog, voices carried on the wind that led travelers astray. Each entry was marked with dates and places. But what struck me most was the way the stories weren't just about fear. They were about respect, about listening to the land's quiet warnings before it was too late. The wind rattled the rig's frame outside, a constant reminder that the wilderness was alive, restless. I read late into the night, feeling my own story fold into the tapestry of those who'd come before, the ones who danced with the shadows and survived, if only barely. The next morning, as frost glistened on the windows, I knew something had changed inside me. Kluane hadn't just been a place on a map or a camping trip to check off. It was a mirror, reflecting the parts of myself I'd never faced. The doubt, the fear, the stubborn pride that made me think I could conquer any wilderness alone. I packed up slowly, taking in the crisp mountain air, the way the light hit the trees like shards of crystal. I understood then that the true danger wasn't just the unknown lurking beyond the firelight. It was underestimating it. It was ignoring the quiet voice inside that tells you to turn back, to respect the land and the stories it holds. Driving south, the shadows of the mountains faded behind me, but the lessons stayed. Kluane's breath was still on my neck, its stories etched deep in my mind. I realized that every camper, every traveler who seeks freedom on the open road carries this weight. We chase adventure, but the wilderness demands something in return. Humility, respect, and the courage to listen when the silence grows too loud. As the miles slipped beneath my tires, I looked forward but also inward, changed by fear, shaped by survival, and grounded by a truth that no campsite could ever erase. Out here, in the wild heart of Canada's most dangerous spots, you don't just live through the night. You learn to honor the dark. And that, I realized, is the most important story any of us can carry home. I pulled the RV off the narrow, dusty road and into the shadow of Dead Man's Gulch. The engine sputtered to a stop, and for a moment I sat there in silence, staring out at the barren valley stretching before me. The Ruby Mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and dark against the fading light. This was exactly what I wanted: isolation, quiet, and a place where the world couldn't find me. The RV had become my escape after Laura died. I could roam wherever I wanted, park wherever I pleased, and it felt like a kind of freedom. But now, sitting here in the middle of nowhere, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The place had a weight to it, like the air was thick with something unseen, something waiting. I climbed out of the RV and stretched, the dry desert air biting at my skin as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. Dead Man's Gulch was as desolate as it sounded. I had read about it in a ghost stories book I found at a thrift store, some legend about miners who disappeared back in the late 1800s. They supposedly saw shadowy figures in the valley at night before the earth collapsed and swallowed them whole. I didn't believe in ghosts, cryptids, or any of the nonsense locals spouted about this place. I just wanted to be alone, away from the pitying glances and endless condolences. No one understood how grief gnawed at you, hollowing you out until nothing was left. Setting up camp took about 15 minutes. I parked the RV next to the remnants of an old mining camp. A few rusted-out carts, the skeletal remains of a cabin, and a collapsed mine shaft disappearing into the hillside. It was perfect. No people, no distractions. Just me, the desert, and the stars. By the time I finished dinner, canned chili, nothing fancy, the sun had dipped below the horizon. I sat at the small table inside the RV, staring at the book in front of me, filled with old tales of ghost sightings and strange disappearances. Most of them from around here. The locals called it the Phantom of the Mines, a shadowy creature that haunted the valleys, stalking anyone who got too close to the abandoned shafts. I flipped through the pages, skimming over accounts of miners swearing they'd seen something dark moving in the fog just before disaster struck. I shook my head and closed the book. Ghosts, shadows, it was all nonsense. Laura would have laughed at the idea. She'd never been scared of anything. Not the woods, not the wild. She was fearless. But I wasn't Laura. As I cleaned up, the RV's lights flickered. I paused, glancing at the ceiling. The lights steadied again, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Just a glitch, I told myself. The RV was old, things broke, but the air suddenly felt colder. When I glanced out the window, I swore I saw movement. Something shifting in the darkness just beyond the headlights. I stepped outside, the crunch of gravel under my boots the only sound. The night was still, too still. The kind of quiet that presses down on you. I scanned the area, the beam from my flashlight cutting through the shadows. Nothing moved, just rocks, dirt, and the skeletal remains of the old mining camp. Then I heard it. Faint, like the sound of gravel shifting underfoot. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. "Get a grip, Jake," I muttered. "It's just the wind." I turned back toward the RV, ready to call it a night, until I saw them. Handprints. Long streaks of dust trailing down the windows as if someone or something had dragged their fingers across the glass. My heart skipped a beat. I was alone. I knew that. No one had passed me on the road for hours. No one was out here. At least, no one should have been. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The RV felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as the wind outside picked up, howling through the narrow canyon. I sat at the table, staring at the window, waiting. But nothing happened. The next morning, the RV was completely dead. No power, no lights, no water pump, nothing. I checked the battery. It was completely drained. It didn't make sense. I had it checked before I left. It was supposed to last for weeks. Frustrated, I spent most of the day trying to figure out what was wrong. But everything seemed fine. The battery had just died. By late afternoon, I gave up. I was stuck here for the night. I cursed under my breath. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just bad luck. I decided to go for a walk, maybe clear my head. The old mine shaft loomed in the distance, and I made my way toward it. The ground was hard and cracked, littered with strange, deep marks crisscrossing the dirt. They looked like they'd been dragged by something large, too large. At the mine's entrance, the air was cooler, thick with the smell of dust and rot. The opening had collapsed years ago, the rocks jagged and sharp. But there, in the dirt, were more of those strange marks, long, deep gouges, like something had been clawing its way out. I backed away, chest tightening. It was just a mine, just old rocks and dirt. But as I turned to leave, I caught something in the corner of my eye, a shadow moving at the edge of the rocks. I whipped around, nothing. I ran back to the RV, heart pounding. That night, the first knock came just after midnight, a loud, deliberate bang on the side of the RV. I shot up, grabbing the shotgun by my bed. My hands shook as I loaded it. Another bang, closer this time. "Who's there?" I shouted, voice cracking. No answer, just the sound of gravel shifting. I grabbed the flashlight and threw open the door. The cold hit me hard. The beam cut through the darkness. Nothing. No one. But then I saw it, a dark, shifting figure at the edge of the rocks. Its form flickered like smoke in the wind. It didn't have a face, but I felt its eyes on me. I raised the shotgun and fired. The blast echoed, but the thing didn't move. It just faded. I stumbled back inside, locking the door. The lights flickered and then went dark. I sat in total blackness, shotgun in my lap, waiting. But it didn't come back. By morning, I'd had enough. I packed up and climbed into the driver's seat. Miraculously, the RV started like nothing had been wrong. I didn't wait. I hit the gas, speeding away from Dead Man's Gulch. The weight in the air lifted, the fog was gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling I had narrowly escaped something dark, something still waiting in those mines. And as I drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, just in case. My name is Montgomery Jerome, and back in 2020, I took my RV up to Kluane National Park in Montana. I've always been a sucker for the great outdoors. There's something about the crisp mountain air that makes you forget about emails and traffic jams. I arrived at the park on a Tuesday afternoon, eager to set up camp before sunset. The place was breathtaking. Towering peaks capped with snow, pristine lakes reflecting the sky, and dense forests that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. I found a spot near Lake McDonald, not too close to other campers, but within a reasonable distance in case I needed a cup of sugar or someone to share a campfire story with. As I was setting up, a fellow camper wandered over. He was a tall, lanky guy with a beard that would make a lumberjack jealous. "Hey there, name's Bill," he said, extending a hand. "Montgomery," I replied, shaking it firmly. "First time up here?" "Nah, I've been coming here for years. Best fishing spot this side of the Mississippi," he said with a grin. We chatted for a bit about the usual, weather, the best trails to hike, and the ever-present possibility of bears rummaging through your food stash. "Just remember," Bill said, "the only thing more unpredictable than the wildlife up here is the weather. Keep an eye on the sky." "Will do," I assured him. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, I cooked up some dinner, nothing fancy, just beans and franks. Gourmet cooking was never my strong suit, but hey, everything tastes better when you're camping. I settled into a folding chair, watching the stars prick through the twilight. It was one of those nights where the sky looked like a spilled jar of glitter. I was just about to turn in when I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. Probably a raccoon or some other critter looking for scraps, I thought. But then I heard it again, closer this time. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the noise. "Who's there?" I called out. Silence. "Great. Now I'm talking to squirrels, I muttered. I decided to ignore it and headed inside the RV. Just as I was locking up, I heard footsteps, definitely human footsteps, crunching on the gravel outside. I peered through the window but saw nothing. Maybe it was Bill playing a prank. I made a mental note to get back at him with a whoopee cushion under his sleeping bag. The next morning, I woke up early, eager to hit one of the trails Bill had recommended. As I was packing my backpack, I noticed something odd. A small carved wooden figure placed on the hood of my RV. It was crudely made, resembling a human, but with exaggerated features, a long nose and hollow eyes. "Very funny, Bill," I said under my breath. I picked it up and looked around, but there was no sign of anyone. Shrugging it off, I tossed the figure into my backpack, thinking it might make for a good souvenir. I set out on the trail, the morning air cool and invigorating. The path wound through thick forests and opened up to stunning vistas of valleys below. About an hour in, I came across a clearing where I saw another camper, a woman this time, looking somewhat lost. "Hey there, you okay?" I called out. She turned abruptly, her face pale. Did you see anyone else around here?" she asked nervously. "Just you and the trees," I replied. "Why?" "I thought I was being followed," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Probably just the wind playing tricks," I offered. She didn't look convinced. "Maybe. I'm Karen, by the way." "Montgomery. Nice to meet you." We chatted for a bit, and I offered to walk with her until our paths diverged. Safety in numbers, right? As we walked, I tried to lighten the mood. "You know, if we get lost out here, at least we'll have a great story to tell, provided we make it back," I joked. She cracked a smile. "Yeah, and if we don't, we at least make the evening news." "Local campers vanish in the woods. Film at 11, I quipped. We parted ways after a while, and I continued deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser, and the canopy above thickened, allowing only slivers of sunlight to pierce through. I checked my map and compass to make sure I was still on the right path. That's when I heard it, a faint humming sound, almost like a chant. I couldn't make out the words, but it sent a chill down my spine. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow the sound. I moved cautiously, the humming growing louder as I approached a hidden clearing. Peering through the bushes, I saw a small group of people dressed in tattered clothes gathered around a fire. They seemed to be performing some kind of ritual, each holding a wooden figure similar to the one I found. Well, this just got interesting, I thought. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but as I zoomed in, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the center of the circle was a body, motionless and covered in what looked like symbols drawn in red. "This isn't a knitting club," I whispered to myself as I tried to back away slowly. I stepped on a dry branch, the snap echoing like a gunshot. The chanting stopped abruptly. "Who's there?" a deep voice demanded. I didn't wait to find out. I turned and bolted back the way I came. Behind me, I could hear footsteps and shouting, "Get him!" someone yelled. My heart pounded in my chest as I weaved through the trees, branches whipping against my face. I didn't dare look back. I could hear them gaining on me, their footsteps crunching leaves and snapping twigs. I spotted a fallen log ahead and had a split-second decision to make. I leaped over it, hoping they'd trip if they followed too closely. Luck was on my side. I heard a thud and a curse as at least one of them hit the ground. "Should have tied your shoelaces," I thought grimly. I kept running until I burst out onto a familiar trail. Relief washed over me as I recognized the path back to the campsite. But my relief was short-lived. Standing on the trail ahead was Bill. "Bill, we have to get out of here," I shouted. He looked at me with an odd expression. "Why the rush, Montgomery? There's a group of people back there doing some kind of ritual. I think they killed someone." He tilted his head, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Oh, you weren't supposed to see that." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "You city folks never learn," he said, taking a step toward me. "Some things are better left alone." I took a step back. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I'm just going to leave." "I'm afraid I can't let you do that," he replied, pulling out a hunting knife. "Is that supposed to scare me?" I blurted out, my mouth moving faster than my brain. He chuckled. "Always appreciate a bit of humor before the hunt." I turned and ran. Down a side path, adrenaline fueling my legs, I ran. Behind me, Bill's footsteps were steady, unhurried. "You're only making this harder on yourself," he called out. I spotted Karen up ahead, frantically waving at me. "This way," she shouted. I didn't question it. I sprinted toward her and we ducked behind a cluster of boulders. "What's going on?" I gasped. "I saw them too," she whispered. "They've been tracking campers and hikers, picking us off one by one." "Fantastic. And here I thought mosquitoes were the worst thing out here," I said. She gave a grim smile. "We need to get to the ranger station." "Agreed. Any idea which way that is?" "About 2 miles east, but we'll have to go off trail." "Lead the way." We moved quickly but cautiously, trying to stay hidden. The forest seemed more menacing now, every shadow a potential threat. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged near a dirt road. "Almost there," Karen said. Suddenly, a truck roared up, cutting us off. 2 men jumped out, both holding rifles. "End of the line," one of them sneered. I raised my hands. "Look, we don't want any trouble." "Funny, neither do we," the other man said, cocking his rifle. Karen glanced at me, her eyes conveying a mix of fear and determination. "Got any more of those jokes?" she whispered. "Why did the chicken cross the road?" I muttered, not helping. Just then, a siren blared in the distance. The men exchanged glances. "Rangers," one of them spat. "We'll deal with you later." They jumped back into the truck and sped off. "Saved by the bell," I sighed. A park ranger vehicle pulled up moments later. An older man with a stern face stepped out. "You folks okay?" he asked. "Never better," I replied. "Just out for a casual jog, being chased by lunatics." He raised an eyebrow. "You want to explain that?" We quickly recounted the events. The ranger's expression grew more serious. "We've had reports of missing campers in the area," he said. "Didn't think it was more than people getting lost." "Well, now you know," Karen said. He radioed back up and instructed us to stay with him. Within half an hour, more rangers arrived along with local law enforcement. They organized a search party and escorted us back to the main campground. As we passed by Bill's campsite, it was completely cleared out, no sign he'd ever been there. "Looks like your friend packed up," the ranger noted. "Some friend," I muttered. Over the next few hours, we gave detailed statements. They asked if we could identify the men we saw. "One of them is named Bill," I said. "Tall, bearded, looks like he wrestles bears for fun." "Could be anyone up here," the officer replied. As the sun began to set, the authorities advised us to leave the park for our safety. "Don't have to tell me twice," I said. Karen and I exchanged contact information. "Maybe next time we'll choose a beachcation," she suggested. "Sand castles over serial killers any day," I agreed. As I drove out of the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. But at least for now, I was getting the hell out of Dodge. A few days later, I did some digging online. Turns out there had been rumors about a group of poachers operating in the area, using the park's remoteness to their advantage. They weren't just hunting animals, they were trafficking illegal goods. And apparently they didn't like witnesses. The leader was a man named William Bill Harkins, a notorious figure with a history of violent crimes. He'd managed to evade capture for years, blending in with the very campers and hikers he preyed upon. Authorities issued a warrant for his arrest, but as far as I know, he's still out there somewhere, moving from one remote location to another. I guess the mountains aren't as peaceful as I thought. My name is Lionel Campbell, and this happened to me on July 15th, 2003. I was never much of an outdoorsman, but when my buddy Chuck Peterson suggested we take his new RV out for a camping trip, I thought, why not? And it'd be good to get away from the city, maybe clear my head a bit. So Chuck, his girlfriend Lucy, and I set off for a small campground near the Washington National Forest in Arkansas. It was supposed to be a weekend of beer, barbecue, and bad jokes around the campfire. We arrived in the late afternoon, the sun still hanging high in the sky. The campground was quiet, just a couple of other RVs scattered around and a few tents pitched by the lake. We found a nice spot near the edge of the woods, giving us a bit of privacy, but still close enough to the main path. Chuck parked the RV and we got to setting up our little camp. Lucy started unpacking the cooler, and I wrestled with the fold-out chairs. Chuck was always the type to over-prepare. He had this huge duffel bag packed with everything you could think of. Flashlights, batteries, a first aid kit, even a couple of machetes. I laughed at him, saying we were camping, not heading into the jungle. He just shrugged and said, Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it, right? By the time we had everything set up, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the campground. We built a fire, cracked open some beers, and settled into a comfortable evening. Chuck told one of his usual tall tales about his days in the Marines, and Lucy teased him about embellishing the details. It was the kind of night that felt perfect in its simplicity. As the night wore on, we started hearing strange noises from the woods. At first, it was just the usual sounds of nature: crickets, frogs, the occasional rustle of leaves. But then it turned into something else. It was a sort of scratching sound, like something clawing at the bark of a tree. I glanced at Chuck, but he just shrugged, dismissing it as a raccoon or some other critter. We eventually decided to call it a night. Chuck and Lucy took the RV's main bed, leaving me to crash on the fold-out couch. I fell asleep quickly, the beer and the fresh air lulling me into a deep slumber. I woke up to the sound of banging on the side of the RV. Groggy and disoriented, I stumbled to the window, peering out into the dark. I couldn't see anything, just the flickering light of the dying campfire casting eerie shadows. The banging stopped, and I figured it must have been an animal. I crawled back onto the couch and tried to fall asleep again, but something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The next morning, I told Chuck about the noises, but he just laughed it off. "Probably a raccoon looking for food," he said, patting me on the back. Lucy seemed a bit more concerned, but she didn't say anything. We spent the day hiking around the lake, fishing, and generally goofing off. It was a good day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As the sun started to set again, we returned to the campsite and fired up the grill. Chuck and I were in the middle of a heated debate about the best way to cook a steak when we heard it again, that scratching noise, closer this time. "Maybe it's Bigfoot," Chuck joked, but there was an edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. We decided to stay up late, keeping an eye on the woods. We sat around the fire, talking and drinking, but none of us were really into it. Every little sound made us jump, and the shadows seemed to move in ways they hadn't before. Around midnight, we heard it again, louder and more persistent this time. Chuck grabbed one of his machetes and a flashlight. "Stay here," he told Lucy and me before heading toward the noise. Lucy clung to me, her eyes wide with fear. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared too. Chuck disappeared into the darkness, the beam of his flashlight bobbing up and down. We heard him cursing, and then a loud thud followed by silence. Lucy started to cry, and I knew I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed the other machete and followed the path Chuck had taken. The woods were eerily quiet, the only sound my own breathing and the crunch of leaves underfoot. I found Chuck lying on the ground, unconscious but breathing. Something had hit him hard. I dragged him back to the campsite, struggling with his weight. Lucy helped me get him inside the RV. We locked the doors and windows, and I stayed up all night, machete in hand, listening to the sounds outside. Every so often, I'd hear that scratching noise, but it never got close. The next morning, Chuck woke up with a splitting headache and no memory of what had happened. We decided to cut the trip short and head back to civilization. As we packed up, we found deep claw marks on the side of the RV, right where I'd heard the banging the night before. They were too big to be from any animal I knew of. We left that place in a hurry, none of us saying much on the drive back. We tried to laugh it off, but the tension was palpable. Chuck and Lucy dropped me off at my apartment, and we promised to keep in touch, but we never did. Something about that weekend changed us, and none of us wanted to relive it. I did some research afterward, trying to figure out what might have attacked us. I found stories about a creature that some locals called the Reaper. They said it lived in the woods, preying on campers and hikers who wandered too far off the path. I don't know if I believe in folklore, but I can't deny what I saw and heard. It's been years since that trip, but I still think about it every time I hear a scratching noise. It takes me back to that campsite, to the fear and confusion. I haven't been camping since, and I doubt I ever will again. Some things are best left unexplored, and some stories are better left untold. The Beast of Blackwater Ridge. I've always prided myself on being the guy who keeps his cool no matter what. That's why I was leading this trip deep into the Blackwater Ridge, Manila National Forest. It was supposed to be a challenge, and I was ready for it. I'd hiked dozens of trails tougher than this, and I wanted to prove that to my old friends, especially Nate, who couldn't even set up a tent without breaking a sweat. But there's something about being miles away from civilization, surrounded by nothing but endless trees, that starts to mess with your head. As soon as we arrived, I could feel it. Not that I'd let anyone see that, of course. "Kara, you got the map?" I called out as we packed up the last of the gear. "Yep, but I doubt we'll need it with you in charge," she winked, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. I grinned. She knew how to stroke my ego, one of the things I loved about her. Nate, on the other hand, was struggling to adjust the straps of his pack. His face was already red, and we hadn't even started walking yet. "Can we take it slow, guys? I haven't done this in a while." "Sure, Nate. We'll pace ourselves," I said, trying to hide my impatience. Sarah, ever the practical one, rolled her eyes but said nothing. She was the scientist of the group, the one who'd be lecturing us about rare plants and ecosystems halfway up the trail. She was here more for research than the hike, but I knew she could handle herself. We hit the trailhead late in the morning, the sun already filtering through the thick canopy above. The first couple of miles were easy enough, well-marked, a few uphill climbs, nothing too rough. Nate fell behind pretty quickly, as expected, but we made enough stops to let him catch up. By the time we reached our first campsite, the air had a heavy, oppressive feel. The sun dipped below the trees, it casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. The dense foliage seemed to swallow up the light, leaving us in a strange twilight. We set up camp without much trouble, although Nate complained about the weight of his gear the whole time. Our tents were cheap, sure, but they did the job. Sarah was meticulous, making sure her tent was perfectly aligned with the slope of the ground. "It's going to rain tomorrow," she said almost as an afterthought. "Clear skies right now." I pointed out, but she just shrugged. Night came quickly, faster than I expected. By the time we had the fire going, the forest had gone almost completely silent. No birds, no insects, just the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustling of leaves. It was weird. I'd been in plenty of forests, but something about this one felt off. "You guys hear that?" Nate said, glancing around nervously. "Hear what?" Kara asked, stirring the pot of stew she'd made over the fire. "No, it's like, I don't know, like something moving out there." I paused, listening. At first there was nothing, but then I heard it too. Soft, distant, and low. A growl, almost like the sound of a heavy breath. "Coyotes," I said, trying to sound confident. "Nothing to worry about. They're probably more scared of us than we are of them." But I saw Sarah tense up. She was studying the woods beyond the firelight, her face set in concentration. I didn't like that. When I turned back to Nate, he was pale, fidgeting with his hands. "Maybe we should keep the fire going all night," he said. "Relax, Nate. We're fine. Nothing's coming near us." But the truth was, something felt off. Even I couldn't shake it. The second day was rough. The terrain started to get steeper, and the trail was less defined. Nate was falling behind more often, and Kara's enthusiasm was starting to wane. We pressed on, but there was a growing sense of unease that none of us could shake. Halfway through the day, we found something that made me stop in my tracks, a deer carcass, ripped apart and strewn across the trail. Blood, dark and congealed, soaked into the ground around it. Whatever had killed it wasn't hunting for food. It looked like something had torn it apart just for the hell of it. Nate gagged, turning away. "What the hell?" Kara knelt beside the body, her face a mix of curiosity and horror. This wasn't a bear. Look at the size of these tracks. I crouched down next to her. She was right, the prints were huge, human-like but twisted. Something was wrong with the feet. Long, deep claw marks gouged into the dirt. I glanced at Sarah. Her face was pale, her brow furrowed in deep concern. "This isn't normal," she whispered. "We should go back." The confident TJ, who could handle anything, suddenly felt a sliver of doubt crawl up his spine. "Nah, we're fine," I said, brushing it off. "It's just some animal. We'll be careful. Let's keep moving." But I knew, we all knew, something was out there, watching. That night was worse. We set up camp earlier, just as the sky began to darken. The wind picked up, carrying a strange metallic scent, something foul. The air felt heavy, thick with unexplainable dread. The fire crackled low, throwing flickering shadows on the tents, but none of us felt the comfort of its warmth. We sat closer than usual, even Nate, who had barely spoken since we found the deer. I sat there gripping the handle of my knife, trying to tell myself I was just being paranoid. But when I looked at the faces of my friends, I knew I wasn't the only one feeling it. "Do you hear that?" Sarah said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. We all went silent, listening. At first, there was nothing but the wind in the trees. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, closer this time. "What the hell is that?" Nate's voice cracked, his eyes wide with fear. "It's just an animal." I said again, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince anymore, but it wasn't. We all knew that. This was something different, something wrong. Wrong. From the shadows beyond the firelight, something moved. It was fast, so fast I barely caught a glimpse. But I saw enough. A tall, hunched figure just beyond the ring of light, watching us. Its eyes glowed bright and unnatural. Kara stood up. "I'm going to check it out." "No," Sarah hissed, grabbing her arm. "Stay here. Don't be stupid." But Kara, always fearless, shook her off and stepped into the darkness. "Kara!" I shouted, grabbing my flashlight. I scanned the darkness, then I saw it, a tall, gaunt creature with dark, leathery skin and glowing red eyes. It lunged. Kara screamed. We ran, and we never saw her again. My name is Lawrence Scott, and back in 1999, I was working search and rescue up in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I spent most of my time navigating dense, misty forests and scrambling up rocky hillsides, helping lost hikers who'd wandered too far from the trails or wrangling bears that got a little too comfortable with human food. I didn't mind the isolation. In fact, that's why I got into the job in the first place. Nothing appealed to me more than a life free from office politics and fluorescent lights. Out here, it was just me, the wild, and whoever I happened to be saving. That summer, we'd had more than the usual number of missing persons cases, particularly in an area known as Deep Gully. The locals stayed away from that part of the park, claiming it was cursed or some such nonsense. Old-timers had plenty of stories about hikers who'd gone in there, never to come back, or who'd stumbled out looking like they'd seen the devil himself. But it wasn't the supernatural nonsense that had me on edge. It was the sheer number of disappearances piling up. I was sent out to Deep Gully to investigate another missing person report. A family of 4 had been camping near the base, and the father, a man named Daniel Whitmore, had gone for a late-night walk and hadn't come back. His wife, visibly shaken, had flagged down a ranger the next morning, her hands trembling and her voice barely above a whisper as she explained how her husband had just vanished into the trees. They had 2 kids with them, about 8 and 12, both sitting wide-eyed and silent as their mother relayed the details. Now, usually when a guy goes missing on a walk, you can chalk it up to getting lost or even falling asleep somewhere. But something about the way she described it, the quickness of his disappearance, the total silence that followed, gave me chills. I brushed it off, though. I'd been out there enough times to know how the wilderness could warp reality, especially for people not used to its isolation. I took off around midday with my pack, water, radio, and a machete. We weren't exactly encouraged to carry firearms unless there was an immediate known danger, and I wasn't about to argue with policy over a routine search. The plan was simple: follow the trail where Daniel had gone, sweep the area, and report back. Deep Gully lived up to its name. It was dark even in broad daylight, with thick canopy cover and massive trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. The place felt ancient, like it had been hiding secrets long before humans ever stumbled into it. Birds rarely sang in that part of the forest. Instead, there was an oppressive quiet, broken only by the crunch of my boots against the earth. I had a solid 2 hours of nothing, not even a hint of disturbed foliage or broken branches that would signal where Daniel had gone. The deeper I went, the heavier the air felt. It wasn't long before I started seeing strange markings on the trees, deep, claw-like gouges running down the bark in patterns that didn't quite look natural. Bears, maybe, but they didn't usually roam this far from the streams, and they wouldn't have left marks this precise. About 3 hours in, I stumbled across something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A scattering of bones, picked clean. They lay in a crude circle, almost ritualistic, arranged with a strange precision that didn't feel random. I knelt to get a better look, noticing that the bones weren't animal. They were too big for that. My gut twisted as I realized they were human, maybe a femur, a couple of ribs, and what looked like part of a jaw. I wasn't an expert, but I'd seen enough to know the difference. Suddenly, the radio crackled, breaking the silence so loudly I almost dropped it. A voice came through, staticky but clear enough. "Lawrence, any sign of him yet?" I pressed the button. Found something. Not him, but human remains. Scattered. There was a long pause before the voice responded. "Stay put, Lawrence. We're sending backup." But I didn't stay put. Curiosity got the better of me, and I moved a little further into the thicket, feeling the eerie quiet sink deeper into my bones. The claw marks on the trees became more frequent, almost overlapping in places, and a foul stench filled the air, a mix of rotting meat and something sharper like sulfur. It was thick enough to make my eyes water. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow cast by the thick branches above. But then it moved. The creature was hunched low to the ground with legs that looked almost canine but were stretched and knotted like the limbs of an emaciated deer. Its skin was taut and grayish, stretched over a skeletal frame that seemed both human and something much older. The head was the worst, elongated, almost horse-like, but with too many teeth, visible even when its mouth was closed. It reminded me of some nightmarish cross between a wolf and a man, though it was neither. I froze, barely breathing, watching as it sniffed the air, tilting its head in a way that felt too deliberate, too calculating. I had no idea if it had spotted me, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. Slowly, I began to back away, step by step, each move deliberate and soundless. Just as I thought I'd made it far enough, I heard a sharp crack, my boot landing on a dried branch. In a flash, it turned its head, snapping toward me with unnatural speed. I could see its claws digging into the ground, coiling its body like a spring, ready to lunge. My brain screamed to run, but my body was locked in place, caught in the terror of that split-second decision. Then it lunged. I managed to snap out of it just in time, diving behind a fallen tree as the creature crashed into the spot where I'd been standing. I heard it thrashing, claws scraping against wood as it clawed at the tree trunk between us. I knew I couldn't outrun it, and I wasn't about to wrestle it with my bare hands. There was nothing left to do but fight. I grabbed the machete from my belt, hands shaking but holding steady enough. As it tried to scramble over the log, I swung upward, slicing across what looked like its shoulder. It let out a choked, rattling sound, staggering back just a bit, but that only seemed to make it angrier. It reared up, towering over me as I crouched defensively, trying to predict its next move. In the chaos, I caught a glimpse of something, a branding mark on its neck, burned into its flesh. Some twisted spiral symbol. I didn't recognize it, but it was as if someone, somewhere, had claimed it, like livestock. Though who would want to keep something like this around was beyond me. The creature lashed out again, and I barely dodged, feeling its claws graze my arm, leaving a burning sensation in their wake. The pain jolted me into action, and I swung the machete with everything I had, this time catching it under the jaw. The blade dug deep, and for a moment I thought it was done. But the thing didn't even flinch. Instead, it grabbed the machete, yanking it out of my hands with one powerful swipe, flinging it to the side. Unarmed and backed into a corner, I did the only thing I could think of. I scrambled backward, looking for anything I could use, but the forest offered nothing. Just as it leapt toward me, something unexpected happened. A shot rang out from somewhere behind us, and the creature faltered, a spurt of dark, tar-like blood oozing from its shoulder. My radio crackled again, and I heard my partner's voice shouting, "Lawrence, run!" I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted, zigzagging through the trees, barely aware of the sounds of pursuit behind me. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but I pushed forward, adrenaline dulling the pain. Finally, I broke through the dense forest, stumbling back onto the trail where a team of rangers was waiting, guns drawn. The creature didn't follow me out. It stopped just within the tree line, its eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intelligence, as if it understood exactly what it had lost. Then it turned and slinked back into the forest, disappearing into the shadows without a sound. Back at the station, I tried to make sense of what I'd seen, but no one could offer any answers. I told my boss about the branding mark, the bones, the strange silence in the gully, but all I got were blank stares and nervous glances. Officially, the incident was chalked up to a bear attack, an excuse we all knew didn't hold up but kept people from asking too many questions. Months later, I heard rumors of a cult operating in the area, one that supposedly worshipped ancient forest spirits or some nonsense like that. The symbol I'd seen on the creature matched a crude drawing in a confiscated notebook found near another ranger station. My name is Jerome Martin. I was 24 when I spent 3 nights alone at Widow's Ridge in West Virginia, chasing a story I should have left alone. This happened in the fall of 2021 when the air carried the first chill of winter and the forest turned crimson and gold. I was a freelance writer known for my series on haunted places in America, and my latest article was supposed to focus on Widow's Ridge, a secluded spot in Monongahela National Forest. Locals spoke of Eleanor Price, the widow of the Ridge, a woman accused of witchcraft in the late 1800s. Her husband and children had vanished, and the townsfolk blamed her. Some claimed she killed them in a ritual, others whispered darker things. She was hanged from a gnarled oak tree at the ridge, and since then the area had become a magnet for tragedy, disappearances, strange deaths, and whispers in the night. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I knew fear made for great stories. So, armed with my RV, a few cameras, and my journal, I set out to uncover the truth. I was used to spooky places, creaky floors, and the paranoia of being alone. Widow's Ridge would be no different, or so I thought. I arrived just before sunset. The ridge was beautiful in a desolate way, with a rocky overlook offering sweeping views of the valley below. The wind whistled through the trees, and the skeletal oak stood alone in the clearing, its twisted branches like claws against the sky. A rope dangled from one of the limbs, frayed and swaying gently. I parked my RV in the clearing and set up camp. As the sun dipped below the horizon, shadows stretched long, and the ridge grew eerily silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the hollow hum of the wind. The first unease crept in, but I brushed it off. Quiet nights in the woods were common. The first sign came that evening. I was reviewing my notes when the sound of soft crying reached my ears. It was faint, carried on the wind, but unmistakable. I froze, straining to hear more. The crying stopped, replaced by a whisper so faint I couldn't make out the words. My pulse quickened. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, scanning the clearing. "Hello?" I called. "Is someone there?" The wind answered me. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a trick of the breeze or a distant animal call. But as I turned back toward the RV, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My journal, which I had left on the table inside, was now lying on the ground, its pages fluttering in the wind. I hadn't touched it. The next day, I met Evelyn Brooks, a reclusive older woman who lived a few miles from the ridge. I had stumbled upon her cabin while hiking, hoping to gather local lore. She answered the door with a wary expression, her gray hair pulled back in a loose bun. "You shouldn't be up there," she said as soon as I mentioned Widow's Ridge. "That place is cursed." "I'm writing about the legend," I explained. "Do you know anything about Eleanor Price?" Evelyn hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "She wasn't a witch, if that's what you're asking. She was a grieving mother. But grief makes people cruel, and they needed someone to blame." "Do you think her ghost is real?" I asked, trying to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Evelyn didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "If you're smart, you'll leave, and don't go near that tree. It's the anchor, her pain, her rage. It's all tied to that cursed oak." I thanked her but didn't leave. This was the kind of detail my readers loved. That night, the ridge turned hostile. It started with the scratches, faint at first, like twigs scraping the side of the RV. I ignored it, but the sound grew louder, more deliberate. When I stepped outside to investigate, there was nothing there, just the wind and the dark silhouette of the oak. Then came the knocking, sharp, deliberate taps on the RV's windows. I spun around, shining my flashlight, but I was alone. My heart pounded as I locked the door and drew the curtains. At midnight, I awoke to the sound of my own voice calling from the woods. "Jerome, help me." The voice was weak, trembling, and unmistakably mine. My blood turned to ice. It was as if a recording of my voice was being played back to me, distorted and wrong. I huddled in the corner of the RV, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I found footprints circling the RV, bare, human footprints that started and ended at the oak tree. They were too small for an adult, too large for a child, and they chilled me to my core. My camera, left on the table overnight, showed distorted images of the ridge with blurry, shadowy figures in the background. I knew I should leave, but the journalist in me refused. If I could capture proof of the supernatural, it would be a career-defining moment. So I stayed. That afternoon, I found an old locket buried near the oak. It was tarnished but intact, with a photo of a woman and 2 children inside. Eleanor Price and her children, I assumed. I tucked it into my pocket, feeling a pang of guilt I couldn't explain. That night, Eleanor made herself known. The air grew heavy, suffocating. The wind stopped entirely. The RV shook violently, as if an unseen force was slamming into it. Then the lights inside flickered, and a shadow appeared, tall and veiled, standing in the center of the room. I couldn't move. My limbs felt frozen as the figure drifted closer, its form growing more defined. I saw her face, pale, hollow, with blackened eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. "Why are you here?" she hissed, her voice like a winter wind. "You disturbed my rest." "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I didn't mean to." The shadow lunged and the world went dark. I woke just before dawn, slumped against the RV wall. The interior was trashed, papers scattered, windows shattered. The locket was gone, and in its place was a single word scratched into the table: leave. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. Evelyn's words echoed in my mind. The oak tree was the anchor. If I wanted to end this, I had to confront it. I stood before the tree at sunrise, holding a canister of lighter fluid and a box of matches. The rope hanging from the branch swayed unnaturally, as if moved by invisible hands. The air buzzed with energy, thick and oppressive. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," I whispered, pouring the fluid around the base of the tree. "But this has to end." The moment I struck the match, the ground trembled. Eleanor's ghost appeared, her form writhing in agony. She screamed, a sound that shook the forest, and charged at me, her veiled figure becoming a blur of shadow and fury. I lit the ring of fire just in time. The flames roared to life, encircling the oak and driving her back. She thrashed and wailed, her form dissipating into the smoke as the fire consumed the cursed tree. When it was over, the ridge was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. Peaceful, almost serene. The oppressive weight had lifted. I returned to Evelyn's cabin to thank her, but the house was abandoned, covered in years of dust. On the porch was a note scrawled in shaky handwriting: "Some stories aren't meant to be told." I left Widow's Ridge that day and never returned. To this day, I don't know if Eleanor found peace or if I simply freed her from the anchor. All I know is that some places hold darkness so deep, it's better to leave it undisturbed. The road into the Adirondacks was long, winding, and empty, just how I liked it. After a few hours of driving, I pulled the RV off the narrow trail and into a small clearing by the lake. The pines stretched high and thick around me, their dark green needles blending into the overcast sky. This was exactly what I needed: complete isolation. No people, no noise, just the quiet of the forest and the sound of my own thoughts. I parked the RV, turned off the engine, and stepped outside. The air was cool, crisp, with a faint smell of pine and damp earth. The only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant ripple of water. Perfect. This place would give me the quiet I craved, a chance to think without the distractions of civilian life. Ever since leaving the military, I'd been chasing peace, and this felt like it could be the spot where I'd finally find it. I grabbed my gear and went about setting up camp. It didn't take long. I'd done this enough times to know the routine: gather firewood, get a small fire going, and make sure the RV was ready for a night out in the wilderness. As I made my way through the trees, something caught my eye. On one of the nearby trunks, there was a strange marking, a crude carving of a figure, long and thin, etched into the bark. I frowned, running my fingers over it. Just a kid's prank, I figured, probably a bored hiker from weeks ago. But as I moved through the forest gathering wood, I found more of them, carved figures on the trees, all tall and slender, stretching higher than any human could reach. It was strange, but I wasn't here to think about strange things. I was here to forget. By the time the sun set, the fire was crackling softly, casting flickering light across the clearing. I settled in next to the warmth, staring out at the darkening forest. There was a peace in the solitude, something comforting about being alone with the sounds of the wilderness. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something. The forest was too quiet. No rustling leaves, no night animals scurrying about, just silence. And then, just beyond the edge of the firelight, I heard it. A soft rustling sound, like something moving through the underbrush. I sat up, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. Nothing. The beam of light cut through the trees, but there was no movement, no sign of anything unusual. I shook my head. "You're just on edge," I muttered to myself, trying to dismiss the tension building in my chest. The wilderness could play tricks on you if you let it. I knew that better than most. I was here to clear my head, not to let it run wild. But then I saw it. At the edge of my vision, just for a split second, something moved. Tall, thin, just beyond the trees. I jumped to my feet, gripping the flashlight tighter, and aimed the beam toward where I'd seen the figure. But there was nothing, only the dark outline of the pines swaying slightly in the wind. I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, every muscle tense, waiting for something to step out of the shadows. But after a long moment, the rustling stopped, the trees swayed, and the forest fell back into its unsettling quiet. I forced myself to sit back down, staring into the fire, trying to shake off the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The next morning, I woke early, determined to shake off the nerves from the night before. I grabbed my gear and decided to hike deeper into the woods. Maybe if I put some distance between myself and the campsite, I could clear my head. The trail was faint, barely more than a thin path winding through the trees. As I walked, I found more of the carvings on the trees, each one stranger than the last. They were everywhere, slender, elongated figures with no faces, all staring outward, all watching. The forest felt darker here, the canopy thick enough that the sunlight barely broke through. About an hour in, I reached a ridge overlooking the valley. The view was stunning, endless trees stretching out below, the mountains rising in the distance. I was about to pull out my camera when I heard footsteps behind me. "Morning," a voice said. I turned to see an older man, probably in his 60s, standing a few feet away. He was holding a bundle of firewood in his arms, his face weathered and sun-creased like someone who'd spent his entire life outdoors. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, giving him a nod. "Not many people come this deep into the forest," the man replied, his voice low and rough. He looked me up and down, then glanced toward the valley. "You camping nearby?" "Yeah, just over by the lake, trying to get some quiet." He gave me a long look, his expression unreadable. "You should be careful. This part of the Adirondacks, it's different." "Different how?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He glanced around, his eyes flicking nervously toward the trees. "There's something in these woods. People call it the Watcher. It stays deep in the forest, watching from the shadows. You see it once, and you'll start seeing it everywhere." I laughed, shaking my head. "Local ghost stories." The man didn't smile. "It's not a story. It's real. People who see the Watcher, they don't come back the same." He took a step closer. "I'm telling you this because you look like you've seen things. You know when something's not right and something's not right here." I met his gaze, feeling that familiar knot of unease tightening in my gut. "What do you mean?" "You'll know when it's close. You'll hear it first and then you'll feel it." He turned, starting back down the trail. "Just don't stay too long." I watched him go, his words echoing in my mind. Part of me wanted to laugh it off as superstition, but the way he'd looked at me, like he'd seen the same thing I had last night, made it hard to dismiss. That evening, back at camp, the unease was worse. The forest felt like it was closing in, the trees towering higher than I remembered, the shadows deeper, darker. The wind had picked up, making the fire flicker and sputter, but it didn't drown out the sounds. The rustling came back, louder this time, and with it, something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the campsite. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the darkness, but the beam barely seemed to penetrate the trees. The footsteps stopped as soon as the light hit them, but when I moved the beam, they started again. I stood turning in a slow circle, the flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other. My pulse was pounding, adrenaline kicking in. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone out here. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything. And then, just beyond the firelight, I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing between the trees. Its body was almost skeletal, its limbs too long, its head bent slightly as if it were watching me from above. Its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, were hollow, dark pits that stared right at me. My blood ran cold. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching, its presence pressing down on me like a weight. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaking despite myself. The figure didn't respond. It stayed still, silent, its form almost blending into the shadows. I raised my knife, backing toward the RV. The figure remained at the edge of the light, watching, waiting. I reached the door, yanked it open, and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. For hours, I sat by the window, knife in hand, waiting for the figure to move. But it never did. It just stood there, barely visible in the darkness, its hollow eyes fixed on the RV. At dawn, the figure was gone, but the carvings had multiplied, dozens of them surrounding the campsite. The same tall, thin figures etched into the trees like a silent army. I didn't waste time. I packed up everything, threw it into the RV, and started the engine. As I drove away, the carvings seemed to watch me, following me down the narrow trail, their hollow eyes staring. I didn't stop until I was miles away from the Ader, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. But even as the trees thinned and the road stretched out in front of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the watcher was still out there, somewhere in those woods. It was still watching, and maybe it always would be. My name is Ignatius Smith, and back in 2015, I decided to take my RV up to Lake Superior Provincial Park in Ontario for some peace and quiet. Being cooped up in the city was starting to make me feel like a sardine in a can, and I figured some fresh air might do me good. Besides, I've always believed that nature and I have an understanding. I don't bother it, and it doesn't bother me. I've never been the rugged outdoorsman type. My idea of hiking involves a well-marked trail and a picnic at the end, but the allure of the open road and the promise of solitude were too tempting to pass up. So I packed my essentials, a week's worth of snacks, a stack of books I'd been meaning to read, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. The drive was picturesque, with the trees flaunting their autumn colors like they were showing off. By the time I reached the park, the sun was casting golden hues over the lake, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I found a secluded spot near the water, set up camp, and made myself a cup of coffee. This isn't so bad, I thought. Maybe I should write a book, Ignatius's Adventures in the Wild. As dusk settled, I decided to light a campfire. There's something hypnotic about watching flames dance. It's like nature's television. I was roasting marshmallows because what's a camping trip without s'mores? When I heard footsteps crunching leaves behind me. "Evening," a voice said. I turned to see a man standing at the edge of my campsite. He was tall and gaunt, with unkempt hair and clothes that looked like they'd been through a war zone. His eyes had a peculiar glint, one that made me instinctively uneasy. "Evening," I replied cautiously. "Can I help you with something?" "Just passing through," he said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Jedediah, but folks call me Jed." "Ignatius," I offered, though he hadn't asked. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" He stepped closer, eyeing the marshmallows. "Sure is. Mind if I join you for a bit?" Every alarm bell in my head was ringing, but I didn't want to be rude. "Actually, I was just about to turn in, long drive and all." He tilted his head, the smile fading. "Fair enough. You take care now." "Will do," I said, watching as he disappeared into the shadows. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Well, that wasn't creepy at all," I muttered, deciding it was indeed time to call it a night. I extinguished the fire and secured the RV. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds chirping and the smell of pine. I convinced myself that I'd overreacted the night before. Maybe Jed was just a harmless drifter. After breakfast, I decided to explore a nearby trail. I left a note on the dashboard, a habit from watching too many true crime shows, grabbed my backpack, and set off. The trail was serene, with sunlight filtering through the canopy and leaves crunching underfoot. I was about an hour in when I noticed something odd, a campsite just off the path, but it looked abandoned. Curious, I ventured closer. Tents were collapsed and belongings were strewn about as if the occupants had left in a hurry. Unease settled in my stomach. This is how people end up in horror movies, I joked nervously to myself. I decided to head back. As I turned, I nearly bumped into Jed. "Whoa, you startled me," I exclaimed. "Sorry about that," he said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. "What brings you here?" "Just hiking," I replied, trying to sound casual. "You?" "Same," he said, his gaze fixed on me. "Shame about what happened here." "Yeah, looks like they left in a hurry," he chuckled softly. "Or something made them leave." I swallowed hard. "Well, I should get going." "Don't let me keep you," he said, stepping aside. I walked briskly back to the trail, feeling his eyes on me the whole time. By the time I reached my RV, my heart was pounding. Maybe it's time to move on to another site, I thought. I started packing up when I heard a rustling behind me. I spun around, half expecting Jed, but it was another man, this one wearing a park ranger uniform. "Sorry to startle you," he said. "I'm Ranger Thompson, just making my rounds." "Oh, thank goodness," I sighed in relief. "Ignatius Farnsworth. Everything all right? You look a bit shaken." I debated whether to mention Jed, but decided I might sound paranoid. "Just had an odd encounter earlier. Do you know a man named Jedediah around here?" The ranger's expression darkened. "Jedediah Clark? Yeah, goes by Jed," he nodded grimly. "We've had reports about him. I'd advise you to be cautious. He's not well." "Not well how?" I pressed. "Look, it's probably best if you relocate to a more populated area of the park," he suggested. "Safety in numbers." "Understood," I said, feeling a knot in my stomach. "Thanks for the warning." As he left, I hurried to finish packing. Just as I was about to start the engine, I realized I'd left my map on the picnic table. I stepped out to grab it when something heavy struck me from behind. Everything went black. I awoke to a splitting headache and found myself tied to a chair inside what looked like an old cabin. The room was dimly lit by a single lantern, casting eerie shadows on the walls adorned with hunting trophies. "Rise and shine," came Jed's voice from the darkness. "What do you want?" I demanded, struggling against the ropes. He stepped into the light, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "Company. Is that too much to ask? Kidnapping isn't exactly the way to make friends," I retorted. He laughed. "Oh, but we're past pleasantries now. Look, if it's money you want..." "Money?" he interrupted. "You think this is about money? No, all this is about survival." "Survival?" He began pacing. "City folks like you come here thinking you own the place, leaving your trash, making noise, disrupting the balance. I'm sorry if I..." "Too late for apologies," he snapped. "You and your kind are a blight." "You're not making any sense," I said, trying to keep him talking while I worked at the knots. He pulled out a hunting knife, examining it thoughtfully. "Sense? Sense is living off the land, respecting its laws, not hiding in metal boxes on wheels." "Okay, noted. I'll just be on my way and promise to leave nature untouched," I said. He shook his head slowly. "Can't let you do that." Before I could respond, there was a loud bang on the door. "Jedediah Clark, this is Ranger Thompson. Open up." Jed's eyes flickered with rage. "You just couldn't stay quiet, could you?" As he moved toward the door, adrenaline surged through me. I managed to loosen the ropes enough to free one hand. Without thinking, I grabbed a heavy wooden stool and waited. As Jed turned back, I swung with all my might. The stool connected with his shoulder, causing him to drop the knife and stumble. "You little," he growled. I didn't wait for him to finish. I bolted for the back door, bursting into the cool night air. My RV was parked nearby and I sprinted toward it, fumbling with the keys. As I jumped inside and started the engine, I saw Jed appear in the side mirror, fury etched on his face. I didn't look back. Later, I learned that Jed had been evading capture for months. He was a former survivalist who lost his grip on reality after a tragic accident claimed his family. As for me, next time someone suggests a nature trip, I'll politely decline. I'm outdoorsy, in that I like having drinks on patios. My name is Harvey Patel, and back in 2008, I found myself in the middle of nowhere near Kearney, Nebraska, trying to fix a flat tire on a road that looked like it hadn't seen civilization in decades. I wasn't in a rush. I was driving back from a cousin's wedding, feeling a little smug because I'd finally beaten my record for the most mediocre best man speech in history. The car was an old Dodge Dart, and its jack was rustier than my uncle's jokes. Kneeling on gravel and cursing under my breath, I heard a strange hum. Not the soft kind like bees or a distant motor, but a heavy, vibrating sound that felt like it was resonating inside my teeth. I turned around, expecting to see some stuck truck or farm equipment barreling down the road, but there was nothing, just open fields and that never-ending Nebraska sky. The hum grew louder and the air seemed to thicken. I stood up, thinking maybe I'd inhaled one too many tire fumes, when suddenly the clouds split open and a flash of light engulfed me. I tried to shield my face, but before I could even swear properly, my feet left the ground. Gravity decided to take a lunch break, and I floated upward into what looked like the underside of a giant metallic saucer. The next thing I knew, I was inside. The interior was clinical, metallic walls with no visible seams and a smell that reminded me of burnt popcorn and ozone. The room was dimly lit, except for a strange, pulsating light in the center. My feet touched the floor and the hum ceased. I looked around, disoriented, and then I saw them. There were two of them, standing at least 8 feet tall with elongated angular heads and smooth, slate-colored skin. They weren't slim like the typical gray aliens you see in tabloids. These guys looked like someone crossed a linebacker with a praying mantis. Their arms were unnervingly long, ending in 3 jointed fingers. Their torsos expanded and contracted rhythmically, like they were breathing through their chests. One of them stepped forward, holding a cylindrical device. A voice, mechanical but eerily calm, emerged from it. Human designation, Harvey Patel. Purpose of abduction, behavioral analysis and genetic cataloging. What now? I blurted, my voice cracking like a teenager caught stealing a beer. The other one tilted its head, then tapped something on its arm. A projection materialized in the air, a 3-dimensional image of Earth spinning slowly. Around it were countless red dots. Data collection required for survival of collective. Your cooperation is mandatory. Yeah, no offense, but I'm not exactly in the mood to be poked and prodded, I said, taking a cautious step back. Also mandatory. That's rich, coming from someone who just yanked me out of a perfectly fine patch of gravel. The first alien adjusted the cylinder and a beam of light scanned me from head to toe. Resistance is inefficient. Inefficient? Buddy, I'm from Nebraska. Inefficiency is practically a pastime. The alien didn't laugh, no surprise there. Instead, it gestured toward a doorway that had materialized in the wall. I figured running was pointless, they'd just levitate me again. So, I followed, muttering under my breath about how I'd skipped dessert at the wedding for this nonsense. The hallway led to a larger chamber filled with pods. Inside the pods were people. Some awake, some not. One of the awake ones, a middle-aged guy in a bowling shirt, spotted me and mouthed, "Don't let him touch your brain." Solid advice, though not very comforting. The aliens directed me to a chair that looked like it was designed by someone who hated human anatomy. Restraints snapped around my wrists and ankles before I could even sit properly. "Okay, look," I said, trying to stall. "Can we talk about your process here? Maybe get a suggestion box? Constructive feedback?" The cylinder-wielding alien ignored me and tapped another control. A sharp, piercing sound filled the room and the pods began to vibrate. The people inside started convulsing. My heart raced as I yanked at the restraints. "Hey, what are you doing to them?" I shouted. "Integration," the alien said. "Subjects provide biological variants. Anomalies identified. Defective samples discarded." "Discarded," I echoed, horrified. "You mean..." Before I could finish, one of the pods shattered and a lifeless body slumped out onto the floor. My stomach churned. They weren't just abducting. They were killing anyone they deemed defective. Fueled by panic and adrenaline, I twisted my wrist until it felt like it might snap and managed to slip free of one restraint. I yanked at the other, watching the aliens as they focused on their grotesque process. The second restraint gave way, and I bolted from the chair, barreling toward the door. An alarm blared, and the walls lit up with flashing symbols. The aliens moved with unnatural speed, their long limbs propelling them toward me. I grabbed the first thing I saw, a metal rod, and swung it with all the force I could muster. It connected with one alien's arm, producing a sickening crunch. The creature staggered but didn't fall. "Great," I muttered. "Indestructible linebackers. Just my luck." I sprinted down the hallway, dodging beams of light they shot from their devices. One grazed my shoulder, leaving a searing pain, but I didn't stop. Ahead, I saw a chamber with what looked like an escape pod. I dove inside, slamming my hand on every button until the door sealed shut. The pod lurched, and I felt a sudden, gut-wrenching acceleration. Through a small window, I saw the saucer shrinking into the distance. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A red light blinked on the console, accompanied by a robotic voice. "Descent trajectory unstable. Brace for impact." "Oh, come on," I shouted, gripping the seat as the pod hurtled toward the ground. The crash landing was rough, but I survived. Crawling out of the wreckage onto soft grass, I looked around and realized I was in the middle of a cornfield. Typical. It wasn't long before I heard sirens and saw headlights. A local farmer and the sheriff pulled up, gawking at the smoldering pod. "What in the hell is that?" the sheriff asked, his hand hovering near his gun. "Long story," I said, coughing. "Let's just say you're going to need more than a deputy for this one." The aftermath was chaotic. Authorities swarmed the area, cordoning off the site and taking me in for questioning. I told them everything, but their skepticism was thicker than molasses. It wasn't until they found the body from the pod, one of the abductees, that they started taking me seriously. Later, I overheard one of the scientists muttering about strange DNA patterns in the corpse, something about genetic modifications and alien engineering. I didn't stick around to hear more. I had enough nightmares to deal with. The last I heard, the government had whisked the pod and the body away to some undisclosed location. As for the aliens, I don't know if they'll be back. But one thing's certain. Next time, I'm bringing a tire iron and a shotgun. I had been driving for hours, the Mojave Desert stretching endlessly around me, barren and vast under the relentless sun. The road was long behind me now, just an empty trail of dust leading out to nowhere. Perfect. This was exactly what I needed. A break from work, from the grind, from people. Out here, there was nothing but silence and space. No cell towers, no deadlines, no distractions, just me and the desert. I pulled the RV to a stop near a rocky outcrop and stepped out. The air was dry and still, the kind of quiet that felt like it was pressing down on you. I took a deep breath, inhaling the warm scent of sand and stone. This was my escape. No buzzing phone, no frantic emails, just the open sky and the endless horizon. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV in the shade of the rock formation and pulling out my gear. I wanted to explore before the light faded. There was something about the desert that always fascinated me, the way the landscape shifted from harsh to beautiful in a matter of hours. But right now, I was focused on one thing: silence. After weeks of being glued to my phone and running from meeting to meeting, the thought of being completely disconnected was a relief. No cell reception out here, no GPS signal, just me and the land. As I unpacked, I heard it. A faint sound, almost too soft to notice. A rhythmic beeping. At first, I thought it was something inside the RV, maybe an alarm or a piece of equipment malfunctioning. But after a quick check of my gear, everything seemed fine. The sound persisted, though, steady and faint, like a pulse just beneath the surface. I stepped outside, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the desert was quiet. The only sound was the faint wind rustling through the rocks. I brushed it off, assuming it was some distant echo of the RV's systems, and finished setting up camp. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, I felt that familiar sense of calm wash over me. This was why I came here. To escape, to let my mind breathe. But that night, the beeping came back. I was sitting by the campfire, watching the flames flicker against the darkening sky when the sound returned, clearer this time. It was still faint but persistent, a soft rhythmic pulse, like something distant calling out. I stood, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I wasn't the type to get spooked easily. Logic and reason were my tools, and they had served me well in the world of engineering. But there was something about the sound, something that felt wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped away from the fire into the darkness. The desert stretched out before me, vast and empty. I started walking, following the faint sound. The rhythmic pulse grew louder as I moved away from the RV. For a while, I saw nothing but sand and rock. The beeping seemed to fade, then grow louder again, like it was moving with me, always just out of reach. I kept walking, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the night. But every time I thought I was getting closer, the sound slipped away. Finally, I stopped. My pulse was racing now, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The beeping had faded again, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the desert. The silence around me was heavy, almost suffocating. I turned back toward the RV. The fire still glowed faintly in the distance as I walked. The beeping returned, faint but steady, like a distant heartbeat. The next morning, the sound was gone. The desert was still quiet, as if nothing had happened. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Isolation could do that. The vast emptiness of the desert, the absence of any familiar sounds, it could mess with your head. I decided to hike further out, hoping to clear my mind. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, the sun already beating down on the sand. I grabbed my gear, making sure I had plenty of water, and started walking toward a rocky ridge I had spotted in the distance. Halfway there, I saw him, a man walking toward me from the opposite direction, his figure small against the endless desert. I hadn't expected to see anyone out here. This was a remote area, far off the beaten path. As the figure grew closer, I could make out an older man, his clothes worn and dusty, his face lined and weathered from the sun. "Hey," I called out, raising a hand as we approached each other. The man nodded, his eyes distant, almost vacant. "You camping out here alone?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, just me," I said, a little taken aback by his bluntness. "I've been walking for days," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You heard it yet? The signal?" I blinked, unsure if I had heard him right. "The signal?" He nodded, his expression grim. "You'll hear it. Once you hear it, you can't get it out of your head. I've been following it for days. It doesn't stop." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" The man glanced around nervously, as if the desert itself was listening. "There's something out here. Something that's been broadcasting for years. It gets inside your head. Starts with the beeping, then it gets louder. You'll see." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. He looked dehydrated, sunburned, like he'd been wandering the desert for days without rest. I offered him some water, but he shook his head and started walking again, heading back the way he came without another word. I stood there watching him disappear into the distance, his words echoing in my mind. "Once you hear it, it doesn't stop." That night, the beeping was louder. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The sound pulsed through the silence, steady and rhythmic, like it was coming from somewhere deep beneath the earth. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the sound was there, burrowing into my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, GPS, water, and set out into the desert. I had to find the source. I had to know what was causing the sound. The desert was pitch black, the sky filled with stars. My flashlight cut through the darkness, the beam dancing across the rocks and sand as I followed the beeping. It was louder now, almost frantic, like it was pulling me towards something. The GPS was acting strange, flickering in and out, as if the signal was being disrupted. But I kept moving, my footsteps crunching in the sand. The beeping grew louder with every step. After what felt like hours, I saw it, a structure, half buried in the sand. A bunker, or a weather station, long abandoned. The beeping was deafening now, emanating from somewhere inside. I hesitated, standing at the entrance of the bunker. The door was ajar, rusted and creaking in the wind. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to leave and forget about the sound. But I couldn't. The signal was pulling me in. I stepped inside. The air in the bunker was stale, suffocating. My flashlight flickered as I moved through the narrow corridor, the walls lined with rusted equipment and old, faded maps. The beeping was louder now, echoing through the metal walls, vibrating in my chest. At the end of the corridor, I found a small room. In the center, there was an old radio tower, its equipment still faintly powered by some unknown source. But that wasn't what caught my attention. On the walls were symbols, strange, intricate markings that looked like they had been carved into the metal. They spiraled outward, converging on the radio tower as if they were feeding into it. In the corner of the room, I found a journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle. The entries were short, scrawled in frantic handwriting. They talked about the signal, how it started with the beeping, how it got louder, how it never stopped. "It gets inside your head," one entry read. "It's not just a sound. It's alive." As I read, the beeping shifted, turning into a high-pitched screech that pierced through my skull. I dropped the journal, clutching my head as the sound rattled through my brain. It wasn't just a signal. It was something more, something that had been waiting, broadcasting, pulling people in. I had to get out. I stumbled out of the bunker, the sound still ringing in my ears. The desert spun around me. I ran, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The landscape warped, the rocks and sand shifting as if the desert itself was alive, moving with the signal. When I finally made it back to the RV, I collapsed inside, my head pounding. The beeping was now a constant dull hum in the back of my mind. I left the desert the next morning, driving as fast as I could. The beeping was still faint, but persistent. I didn't look back. Even now, days later, back in the city, I can still hear it, a faint, rhythmic pulse in the back of my mind. Always there, always calling me back. The signal isn't done with me yet. My name is Gideon Gibson, and this happened back in 2017 in Shawnee National Forest, Illinois, when I first took a temporary ranger job there to help with the busy fall season, never suspecting I'd leave that place with shaking hands and a heart full of questions. I remember stepping into that small ranger station around late September, feeling pretty good because I'd managed to snag a cheap motel room in town that morning. I had a bland cheese sandwich for breakfast, just something out of the convenience store freezer section, and washed it down with watery coffee. I wore a faded uniform passed down from a previous hire who'd left mustard stains near the left pocket. It smelled like stale sweat and cheap detergent, but I was just glad to have work. I was 25, broke, and eager to prove myself reliable. I liked the quiet of the forest trails, the dense maples and oaks, and the smell of damp leaves after last week's rain. We had a small team, just me and 2 others on rotation that day. Tom, older and with a bushy beard that he tied with a rubber band, always joked about his ex-wife and how her new husband sold fancy lawnmowers. And Gina, in her early 40s, usually wore a baseball cap over short-cropped hair. She had a habit of humming some old tune I couldn't place whenever she got nervous. She'd say, "Pat, you know that feeling when you think the woods are just a bit too still?" I didn't know what she meant back then. I thought forests were supposed to be quiet. That morning, Gina handed me a radio and said, "Don't wander off without checking in. It's not summer camp season, but we still get the odd hiker." By noon, I was on a trail known as Pine Hollow Path, which, despite the name, had more oaks than pines. The canopy let through thin beams of light, and the forest floor was scattered with red and brown leaves. I came across a half-eaten energy bar wrapper on the path, which struck me as odd because we usually lectured visitors about leaving no trash. I stuffed it in my pocket. About an hour later, I stumbled on something far more disturbing, a torn jacket sleeve snagged on a low branch. It looked recent, maybe a day old, and the fabric was stiff with something dark. I didn't want to think about it. That's when I radioed Tom, "Hey, found a torn piece of clothing, could be a lost hiker. Anything on the logs?" Tom answered with a yawn. "We had a party of 3 who checked in yesterday. They should have been out by now." That sent a chill into my chest, and I began scanning the underbrush with more care. I followed a faint trail of broken twigs and disturbed leaves off the main path. About 20 feet in, I smelled something unpleasant, like old meat left out on a warm countertop. I advanced slowly, heart tapping at my ribs. In a small clearing behind a fallen tree, I found the body of a man. He looked about 40, wearing a hiking vest and boots. His left arm lay twisted at a strange angle, and part of his torso had been torn open. The sight made my stomach lurch. I stepped back, pressed my hand against my mouth, and tried to breathe through it. Then I spoke into the radio with forced calm. "Tom," I said, "I've got a deceased male hiker here. Looks like an animal attack." Gina broke in, her voice uneasy. "Animal attacks are rare here. Are you sure?" I didn't answer her. I just gave them my coordinates. While I waited, I squatted down, thinking maybe the poor guy slipped and got mauled by a coyote or something. But coyotes don't usually leave bodies like that. I took in the surroundings, noticing deep scratches on a nearby tree trunk, higher than my shoulders. There was a pattern, something I couldn't quite place, but it definitely wasn't from a raccoon or a bobcat. When Tom and Gina arrived, they were both grim-faced. Tom tried to hide his shock. Gina stopped humming. She just stared and shook her head. We decided to search for the other 2 hikers from that party of 3. Tom radioed the station to call for authorities. We couldn't just leave, not with the possibility of survivors. We moved deeper into the woods, spreading out but staying close enough to yell if something happened. I remember wiping sweat off my forehead, even though it wasn't that hot. The silence weighed on me. Sometimes a branch cracked underfoot and I jumped. Then we found another body. This time it was a woman, slumped against a boulder. Her pack was gone, her face frozen in a look of pain. She had similar wounds, and the ground around her was stained and scattered with damp leaves. I wish I hadn't eaten that cheese sandwich earlier. "Hello? Anybody out here?" I called. No answer. I heard Tom whisper, "This is bad, Pat." I nodded, my mouth dry. Gina, who walked a short distance away, suddenly shouted, "Found footprints." We hurried over. There were large impressions in the soft earth, bigger than any mountain lion print I'd seen in guides. They looked like a cat's, but heavier, deeper. "A cougar?" Tom asked. Gina shrugged. "Not impossible, but..." She trailed off. Something about these tracks bothered her. They showed long strides, more powerful than what we expected. We decided to keep searching for the third hiker. The afternoon light was fading, and we had to use flashlights. Being out there as dusk approached set me on edge. I found myself talking just to break the tension. "Tom, remember that big raccoon we saw by the dumpsters yesterday?" Tom grunted. I tried a lame joke. "If that raccoon shows up now, I'll offer him my last candy bar to watch our backs." No one laughed. Then, at twilight, we heard a scream. Quick and sharp, we ran toward it, stumbling over roots and rocks. We found the third hiker, alive at first. A young guy in his 20s, holding his side, crouched under a half-fallen tree. "Help!" he shouted, voice cracking. We rushed over, flashlights jumping. He looked terrified, eyes darting behind us as if expecting something to pounce. "It took them. It's out here." He didn't have to say more. We heard heavy steps in the brush, a soft rustling that made my skin prickle. We formed a semicircle around the wounded hiker, shining our beams into the dark trees. I saw a shape then, low and muscular, moving between trunks. No distinct silhouette, just movement. My heart thundered. Then it rushed forward. I could barely describe its form. A cat-like body, maybe 5 feet long, thick shoulders, dark fur that blended with the night. It moved quietly at first. Then, thump, it slammed into the injured hiker. He screamed. We shouted, shining lights into its face. I saw powerful jaws flash open and close. The man's screams turned into choking gasps. I stepped forward, but Tom grabbed my shoulder. "Pat, no, it's too late." Gina swung her flashlight at the creature's head, and it hissed, a strange, sharp sound. Then it ran off into the darkness, leaving the man on the ground. He was gone, and that was only the beginning. We knelt beside him. He was gone. It had ended his life in seconds. Gina cursed under her breath. Tom looked like he might cry. I felt sick again, kneeling there, trying to hold my flashlight steady. Now we had 3 dead hikers, a killer animal somewhere in the woods, and night pressing in on all sides. We made a plan to retreat to the station. The radio crackled as we tried to call for backup. Spotty reception. "We need the phone," I said. Tom nodded. We hurried back along the trail, our flashlights bouncing over tree trunks and roots. Gina whispered, "Don't run. Running sets it off." We moved briskly, but tried to look calm, which was impossible. I gripped my radio so hard my knuckles hurt. Halfway back, we realized something was keeping pace with us. Branches snapped lightly. I tried to catch a glimpse, but only saw shifting silhouettes. We picked up speed. "I'll buy us all dinner if we get out of this," I muttered. No one responded. I suppose we all wanted to pretend we were anywhere else, maybe at a diner with French fries and milkshakes, not stuck in the dark with a vicious predator. At one point, Tom lagged behind to catch his breath. "Go ahead," he said. "I'll be right there." Gina and I stopped, turned back. "Don't be stupid," she said. "We stick together." He nodded and lumbered forward, chest heaving. He was bigger than me, maybe 50 pounds heavier, and the fear weighed on him. We formed a tight group, shining lights in every direction. The woods smelled damp and earthy, and every sound set me on edge. We reached a fork in the path. By then, I noticed fresh scratches on the bark of a large oak, long, parallel marks, too clean to be random. We heard a sudden snapping of twigs and spun around. The creature rushed past our lights so fast I barely saw more than a dark shape. Tom shouted, "There!" but it moved in a blur. Gina and I tried to stand stacked to back with him. We breathed in quick, shallow gasps. I held a length of sturdy branch I'd picked up, though I doubted it would help much. A moment passed, maybe less. Then it struck again, hitting Tom this time. I swung the branch wildly, hitting only air. I saw Tom on the ground, coughing, struggling. Gina screamed at me to help him. I knelt and tried to pull him up. His chest and shoulder were torn, and his hands shook as he reached for me. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I tried to stop the bleeding with my jacket, but it was too much. His eyes fluttered. I pleaded, "Come on, Tom, don't leave me here, man." He said nothing else. Gina stood guard, flashlight shaking in her grip. The forest was too silent again. After a minute, I realized Tom was gone. My eyes stung with tears. I swallowed hard and said, "Gina, we have to run." We ran. I know I said not to run earlier, but we had no choice. Our boots pounded the dirt. The station wasn't far. The creature crashed through the brush behind us, keeping pace. My lungs burned and my mind spun. I tried to recall if there was a service rifle locked at the station. Maybe, maybe not. Anything would help. Gina was ahead of me, her flashlight beam shaking. We broke through the last stand of trees and saw the faint light from the station's bulb. I fumbled for the door, keys rattling. Inside, I slammed it shut and pushed a heavy cabinet against it. Gina collapsed into a chair, gasping. "We lost Tom," she said flatly. I nodded, pressing my forehead against the door. We tried the landline phone. Static. We tried the radio. No immediate response. Maybe the call had gone out earlier and help was on the way. Maybe not. While Gina searched for a first aid kit, I peered out a small window. Nothing but darkness and the suggestion of trees. I listened hard, hearing only the hum of the station's small fridge. There was a box of flares on a shelf, and I pulled one out, thinking maybe we could signal someone. I waited, half expecting the animal to burst in, but it didn't. Hours passed. Gina stayed quiet. I remember rummaging through a drawer and finding a half-eaten bag of pretzels. My throat was too tight to swallow. As the first hint of dawn broke, we dared to open the door a crack. The forest looked normal. Dew on leaves, pale light filtering through. No sign of the creature. No strange prints by the door. Nothing. We stepped outside, tense, every sense sharpened. We didn't talk about going back to look for the bodies. We just knew we had to get the proper authorities and show them. We found a ranger truck behind the station, old, but it ran. Gina drove while I clutched the flare gun. My hands trembled with every bump in the dirt road. We made it out, but we carried what we saw inside our minds. When the sheriff's deputies and wildlife officers arrived later that day, they searched in teams, rifles ready. They found the bodies. They found unusual tracks, but I never heard a confident explanation. Maybe a rogue predator wandered in from another region. Maybe something escaped from a private collector's estate. I don't know. Gina and I never got a satisfying answer. They patrolled heavily for weeks. Nothing else turned up. Eventually, people said it must have been a one-time tragedy. I still think about it. I still see that creature's eyes in the beam of my flashlight. Sometimes I wonder if it slipped away to another stretch of forest, still hungry, still waiting to surprise someone. I can't shake that thought. Even today, when I step outside at dusk, I pause and listen harder than I did before, just in case. My name is Franklin Warren, and this happened to me on June 11th, 1999. I had decided to take a week off from my job as a mechanic in Baltimore to do some solo camping. I'd bought a secondhand RV, nothing fancy, but it was my escape pod. I chose a spot in the Kluane National Forest in Pennsylvania, a place far enough from the hustle and bustle but close enough that I could get back if needed. I remember packing up the RV early in the morning, making sure I had enough supplies for the week. Water, food, a few books, and my fishing gear. I wasn't much of a hunter and I didn't own a gun. The most dangerous thing I expected to face was a raccoon trying to steal my food. I wasn't exactly a survivalist, just a guy looking to unplug for a bit. The drive took about 5 hours. I pulled into the campsite around noon, parked the RV, and set up. The spot was perfect. A small clearing surrounded by trees with a view of a nearby lake. There were a few other campers around, but they were scattered far enough that I felt alone. I spent the first day fishing, catching a couple of small bass, and reading a bit. The weather was perfect, and I felt more relaxed than I had in months. That night, after a dinner of fresh fish and canned beans, I sat by the campfire, enjoying the quiet. I could hear the distant sounds of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. Around 10, I decided to call it a night. I doused the fire, locked up the RV, and climbed into bed. I slept well the first night, waking up with the sun. I spent the next couple of days exploring the area, hiking and fishing. I ran into a few other campers, exchanging nods and small talk, but mostly kept to myself. It was on the third night that things started to get strange. I was sitting by the fire, enjoying a beer, when I heard rustling in the bushes behind the RV. At first, I thought it was just a deer or some other animal, but the sound was heavier, more deliberate. I stood up and called out, "Who's there?" But there was no response. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the noise, but saw nothing, just trees and darkness. I shook it off and went back to my seat, but the uneasy feeling lingered. I finished my beer and decided to head to bed early. I made sure everything was locked up tight before crawling into bed. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a strange sound, a low, rhythmic thumping. It was coming from outside, near the rear of the RV. My heart started to race as I lay there, listening. Thump, thump, thump. I got out of bed, slowly, trying not to make any noise. I peeked through the small window at the back, but it was too dark to see anything. The thumping continued, steady and relentless. I debated going outside to check it out, but decided against it. Instead, I grabbed my pocket knife and sat on the edge of the bed, waiting. After what felt like hours, the noise stopped. I stayed awake, listening for any other sounds, but everything was quiet again. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep, the knife still in my hand. The next morning, I found a series of deep, parallel scratches on the back of the RV near the storage compartment. They were too high up to be made by any animal I could think of. My mind raced with possibilities, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was some kind of prank. I decided to stay an extra night, thinking I might be overreacting. That day, I drove into the nearest town to get some extra supplies, and maybe a weapon. But the small hardware store didn't carry firearms. I picked up a sturdy hatchet and some bear spray, figuring it was better than nothing. The guy behind the counter, a wiry old man named Hank, gave me a curious look when I asked about guns. "Don't get many folks asking for guns out here," he said. "You sure you're okay?" "Yeah, just had a weird night. Probably nothing," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Well, if you need help, there's a ranger station about 10 miles up the road. Ranger's name is Joe. Good guy." "Thanks. I'll keep that in mind." I headed back to the campsite, the unease gnawing at me. I spent the day close to the RV, chopping wood and trying to distract myself. As night fell, I built a larger fire than usual, the hatchet and bear spray within arm's reach. Around midnight, the thumping started again. This time, it was louder, more insistent. I grabbed the hatchet and stepped outside, my heart pounding. The fire cast long shadows, and I could see movement at the edge of the clearing. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice shaking. The movement stopped for a moment. Everything was still. Then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long limbs and a gaunt face. Its eyes glowed faintly in the firelight, and its mouth twisted into what I can only describe as a smile. I froze, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The creature took a step forward, and I stumbled back, nearly dropping the hatchet. It made no sound, just kept advancing slowly. "Stay back!" I yelled, raising the hatchet. The creature paused, tilting its head as if curious. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it lunged at me. I swung the hatchet wildly, connecting with its arm. It let out a screech, a high-pitched, bone-chilling sound, and recoiled. I took the opportunity to run, scrambling back into the RV and slamming the door shut. I could hear it outside, scratching at the door and walls. I fumbled with the keys, starting the engine. The RV roared to life, and I floored it, tearing out of the campsite and down the dirt road. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. What the hell was that thing? I didn't stop until I reached the ranger station Hank had mentioned. I banged on the door, shouting for help. A tall, burly man in a ranger's uniform opened the door, looking alarmed. "Calm down, son. What happened?" I tried to explain, my words tumbling over each other. Ranger Joe listened, his face growing more serious with each word. He stepped outside, looking at the scratches on the RV. "We need to get you inside now," he said, his voice steady but urgent. We went inside, and he locked the door behind us. I noticed he had a rifle slung over his shoulder. "What did you see?" he asked, his tone grave. I described the creature, every detail I could remember. Joe listened, nodding slowly. "You're not the first to see it," he said finally. "We call it kith. It's been around these parts for as long as anyone can remember. Usually keeps to itself, but sometimes." He trailed off, staring out the window into the darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was real. This thing was real. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We wait. It usually doesn't follow this far, but we stay vigilant. If it comes, we're ready." We sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. Hours passed and dawn finally broke. The creature, kith, didn't show up. Joe helped me patch up the RV, and I decided to cut my trip short. As I drove away from the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide something. Every sound made me jump. I got back to Baltimore and went straight to a pawn shop, buying a shotgun. I never went camping alone again. Years later, I still think about that night. I never told anyone else, figuring they'd think I was crazy. But I know what I saw, and I know that kith is still out there in the deep, dark woods, waiting. So if you ever find yourself in the Allegheny National Forest, be careful. Stay alert, because some things in this world are beyond our understanding, and some stories are best left untold. The road into the Boundary Waters was a frozen ribbon through a sea of snow, the trees standing like silent sentinels under heavy blankets of ice. The RV's heater hummed steadily, but even that couldn't keep the biting cold out. I was deep into the wilderness now, the place I'd picked to spend a week. Just me, the frozen lake, and the stillness of winter. I'd been coming to places like this for years, ever since the accident. The solitude was the only thing that seemed to quiet my mind. This time, I was here to ice fish, maybe snap a few photos for my nature blog, but mostly I was here to prove to myself that I could still handle it. The cold, the isolation, the memories. I pulled the RV to a stop by a small frozen lake I'd scouted on a map. It was miles away from the nearest town, completely off the grid, just how I liked it. I stepped out into the icy air, my breath fogging in front of me as I took in the sight. The lake was a vast white expanse, the ice thick enough to drive on, stretching out into the distance where the trees disappeared into a blur of white. Perfect. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV near the shoreline and gathering my gear for ice fishing. The cold had a way of creeping into your bones out here, but I didn't mind. I was used to it. I grabbed my auger, trudged out onto the ice, and started drilling a hole. The sound of the blade biting into the ice echoed through the stillness, sharp and harsh against the quiet of the wilderness. Then I heard it, a deep, low rumble that seemed to come from beneath the ice. I paused, the auger still in my hands, and listened. The sound came again, a low, distant vibration like the ice shifting far beneath the surface. I'd heard ice groan before. Anyone who spends enough time in the cold knows the sound of a lake adjusting to the freeze, but this was different. It was deeper, longer, almost like something was moving down there. I brushed it off and kept drilling. By the time the hole was ready, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. I set up my fishing gear, lowered the line into the icy water, and settled in to wait. The cold crept in quickly, even through my heavy coat, but I was prepared for it. I'd done this 100 times before, and the routine was comforting. But that sound, the rumble beneath the ice, kept creeping back into my thoughts. As night fell, I lit a small fire near the shore, the flames flickering weakly against the chill. I sat by the fire, staring out at the frozen expanse of the lake. The stars were starting to appear in the clear sky above, bright and distant. Then I saw it, a light faintly flickering and coming from beneath the ice. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe the moonlight hitting the ice in just the right way. But as I watched, the light moved slow and steady, as if something was drifting beneath the surface. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it was still there, faint and regular, like a lantern swaying beneath the ice. I stood, my heart pounding in my chest, and walked toward the lake. The light seemed to pulse, growing brighter for a moment, then dimming again, always moving, always just out of reach. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light or a reflection of something from the sky, but deep down, I knew better. There was no one else out here, no one who could be moving under the ice. The rumble came again, louder this time, vibrating up through the soles of my boots. I took a step back, suddenly feeling exposed out there on the open ice. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and I turned back toward the RV, my mind racing. The light, the sound, something wasn't right. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went back out onto the lake, determined to make sense of it all. The sun was barely up, and the cold was more biting than ever. As I walked, I glanced back toward the hole I drilled the day before. Something was off. There, by the edge of the hole, was a long, jagged crack running across the ice. The crack hadn't been there yesterday. It snaked out in a jagged line, as if something had pressed up from below. I knelt down, running my gloved fingers along the crack, feeling the cold seeping through the ice. The surface felt thin, too thin for the middle of winter. Then I noticed something glinting just beneath the ice. I leaned closer, peering into the crack. At first, it looked like a piece of metal, rusted and sharp, lodged beneath the surface. I reached into the cold water, pulling it free. It was old, jagged, like part of a machine, but there was no reason for it to be here. The nearest road was miles away, and there hadn't been any mining or construction in the area for years. The metal was strange, sharp and smooth, like it had been cut clean. As I held the piece in my hand, the rumbling came again, louder now, closer. I stood quickly, scanning the lake. The light was back, faint but steady, moving beneath the ice closer than before. My pulse quickened, and I felt a cold sweat break out under my coat. Something was down there. Something was moving. I backed away from the crack, my mind racing. The metal, the light, the sound, it all pointed to something beneath the ice. Something unnatural. But what? The stories I had heard over the years about strange things beneath the frozen lakes, about disappearances and creatures buried deep in the ice, came flooding back. I'd always dismissed them as nonsense, campfire stories to scare the newcomers. But now, standing there in the middle of the frozen lake, I wasn't so sure. I needed answers. Later that day, as I was gathering more firewood, I came across an old ice fishing shack near the edge of the lake that looked abandoned, but there were fresh footprints in the snow leading up to the door. Curious, I approached, knocking lightly before pushing the door open. Inside, I found an older man hunched over a small stove, warming his hands. His face was weathered, his beard streaked with gray, and he looked up at me with tired eyes as I stepped in. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man grunted, his eyes narrowing. "Not many come this deep into the wilderness." I hesitated. "I've been hearing strange sounds under the ice, and I saw a light last night moving beneath the surface. Do you know anything about that?" The man's expression darkened. He turned back to the stove, staring into the flames. "You shouldn't be out on that lake," he said quietly. "There are things beneath the ice, things that shouldn't be disturbed." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. The man sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "There's an old mining operation under that lake, abandoned long ago. They were digging deep, too deep. Some say they woke something up down there. Ever since, strange things have happened. People go missing. The ice breaks when it shouldn't. And that light, it's not the only thing that moves down there." A chill ran down my spine. "What's under there?" The man shook his head. "I don't know, but I've been coming out here for years, and I've seen enough to know when something isn't right. The lake's alive. It's watching you." That night, the light beneath the ice returned, brighter than before, pulsing like a heartbeat. I watched from the RV, my breath fogging up the window, as the rumbling beneath the ice grew louder, more insistent. I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever was beneath the lake, it was waking up. I packed my gear quickly, throwing everything into the RV, but as I started the engine, the ground beneath the RV began to tremble. The rumbling was almost deafening now, vibrating up through the frozen earth. I glanced out toward the lake, and my blood ran cold. The ice was cracking, long fissures spreading out from the center of the lake. And then, in the distance, the surface of the ice exploded upward, a massive shape breaking through. I only caught a glimpse, something dark and enormous, sliding beneath the ice again, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. But it was enough. I floored the gas pedal, the RV lurching forward as I raced away from the lake, the sound of cracking ice echoing behind me. The road was a blur, my heart pounding in my chest. But even as I drove, I could still feel it. the weight of something massive beneath the surface, watching, waiting. When I finally reached the main road, the rumbling stopped. But the memory of that thing beneath the ice stayed with me. I'll never forget it. The way the light pulsed, the way the ice cracked as if it were alive. I left the boundary waters behind, but a part of me knows I'll never truly escape it. Some things should stay buried, and whatever's beneath that lake, it's not finished yet. My name is Fabian Cooper, and this happened to me on September 14th, 1998. I've been a search and rescue officer for almost 2 decades now. I've seen a lot, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened in the fall of '88. It was one of those years when the forest seemed to breathe easier. The air crisp and cool, the leaves transforming into a kaleidoscope of red, orange, and yellow. Most of my days were spent patrolling the trails and helping lost hikers find their way back. It was a job I loved, one that gave me a sense of purpose and connection to nature. It started as a regular Friday. I was in the ranger station, sipping on a cup of coffee, the kind that's more bitter than soothing, when the call came in. A family reported their teenage son missing. They were camping in the dense woods of the Cascade Range near a spot we locals called Blackwood Hollow. It wasn't a popular area. In fact, it was pretty remote, which made it all the more concerning. The boy, Kyle Thompson, had been missing for nearly 12 hours. I grabbed my gear, radioed my partner Rick, and we headed out. Rick was a good guy, a bit younger than me, with a sharp mind and quick wit. We joked about how every rescue mission felt like we were stepping into an old western, with us as the cowboys riding into the unknown. We reached Blackwood Hollow by late afternoon. The place had an eerie calm to it, a stillness that seemed to swallow sound. We met Kyle's parents at their campsite. They were frantic, the mother on the verge of tears, the father pacing like a caged animal. They explained that Kyle had wandered off the previous night, saying he was going to explore, but he never came back. Rick and I started our search, moving in a grid pattern, calling out Kyle's name. We had a good system, years of experience between us. As dusk settled, the forest grew darker, and our flashlights barely cut through the thickening gloom. There's something about the woods at night that gets under your skin, makes you feel like you're being watched. About an hour in, we found Kyle's backpack. It was lying at the base of a massive oak tree, partially covered in leaves. Inside were typical teenage things, a flashlight, some snacks, a notebook, but no sign of Kyle. We pressed on, our shouts becoming more urgent. Then we heard it, a faint, distant cry. It was hard to pinpoint, but it was there. We followed the sound, moving quickly now, the urgency driving us forward. The cries led us deeper into the forest, to a part I wasn't familiar with. The trees were denser, the path narrower. It felt like we were being funneled into a trap. We came upon a clearing, and there, in the middle, was a small, dilapidated cabin. It looked abandoned, windows shattered, roof caved in. The cries were louder now, coming from inside. Rick and I exchanged a look. This wasn't right, but we had to find Kyle. We approached the cabin cautiously, flashlights sweeping the area. I called out, "Kyle, you in there?" No response, just the continued whimpering. We pushed the door open, and the smell hit us first. Damp, rotting wood mixed with something metallic. Blood. Inside, the place was a mess. Furniture overturned, debris everywhere. In the corner, we saw him. Kyle, huddled and trembling, eyes wide with fear. But he wasn't alone. Standing over him was a figure, tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. Before we could react, the figure lunged at Rick, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. Rick went down, and I barely had time to draw my knife. I slashed at the figure, connecting with something solid. It hissed, a sound that made my skin crawl, and retreated into the shadows. I grabbed Kyle, pulling him to his feet. "Run!" I shouted, and we bolted out of the cabin. Rick was on the ground, clutching his side, but alive. We made it to the clearing before I dared to look back. The figure was standing in the doorway, watching us, but it didn't follow. We helped Rick up, and with Kyle between us, we made our way back to the campsite as fast as we could. The whole time, I felt like we were being hunted, the trees closing in around us. But we didn't stop, didn't look back, until we were safely at the ranger station. Kyle's parents were relieved, their gratitude evident, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Rick was taken to the hospital, his wound deep but not life-threatening. I stayed behind, trying to piece together what had happened. The authorities were called, and a search was conducted, but the cabin was never found. Kyle's memory was hazy, filled with fragments of a nightmare he couldn't fully recall. He mentioned being lured by a voice, something that seemed human, but wasn't. Weeks passed, and the incident was quietly swept under the rug. Officially, it was chalked up to a bear attack, though anyone who'd seen the wounds knew better. Rick recovered, but he left the job soon after. Said he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching. I stayed on, but Blackwood Hollow became a place I avoided. The forest felt different, like it had secrets best left undisturbed. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispers through the trees, I sometimes hear that faint cry, a reminder of the things that lurk in the shadows of our world. Years later, the memory still haunts me. Not just the encounter, but the sense of helplessness. The realization that there are things out there beyond our understanding. Kyle grew up, moved away, tried to forget, but I couldn't. It became a part of me, a shadow that followed wherever I went. One night, I was having a beer with an old friend, Jason. He was another ranger, one who had his own stories of the strange and unexplainable. We were sitting on my porch, watching the stars, when I finally told him about that night in Blackwood Hollow. He listened, a thoughtful look on his face, then nodded. "I've heard similar stories," he said. "Different places, different faces, but the same kind of presence. Some say it's a spirit. Others think it's something more primal, more ancient." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of his words hanging in the air. It didn't bring me comfort, but it felt good to share the burden, to know I wasn't alone in my experience. Life went on, as it does. I kept doing my job, helping those lost in the wilderness, always with a cautious eye on the tree line. I never went back to Blackwood Hollow, and neither did Rick. It became one of those places with a story attached, a whispered legend among the rangers. In the end, I think that's what it was, a legend. Something that exists on the edges of our reality, only revealing itself when we stray too far into the unknown. And maybe that's for the best. Some things are meant to remain hidden, their mysteries left unsolved. I still wonder about that night, about what I saw and what might have happened if we hadn't escaped. It's a question that lingers unanswered, a reminder of the thin line between our world and whatever lies beyond. And as long as I'm alive, I'll carry that memory with me, a testament to the things we'll never fully understand. My name is Everett White, and I was 29 years old when I decided to abandon my city life and embrace the solitude of the wild. This happened in the spring of 2022, deep in the remote expanse of Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. I had traded the chaos of my old life, a grueling tech job and a breakup that left me hollow, for the tranquility of the Appalachian wilderness. At least, that's what I thought I'd find. I had heard whispers about Black Hollow, an isolated area nestled near Cheat Mountain, but they were just that, whispers. Locals at the last gas station warned me about strange happenings in the hollow, but I chalked it up to small-town superstition. I wanted quiet, not ghost stories. My RV, modest but reliable, became my sanctuary. Equipped with solar panels and enough supplies to last a week, I parked at the edge of the hollow and planned to spend my days hiking and journaling. The first few hours were serene, just the sounds of chirping birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. But by sunset, the forest had changed. The first sign was the silence. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, muting every bird and every insect. I paused mid-step on my way back to the RV, my boots crunching against the gravel road, the only sound. A chill crawled up my spine, but I shook it off. Solitude does strange things to the mind. As I prepared dinner that evening, the quiet pressed against the walls of the RV. I tried turning on my solar-powered lights, but they flickered weakly before going out entirely. A malfunction, I thought. I could fix it tomorrow. I used a flashlight instead, its narrow beam making the shadows seem alive. I was climbing into bed when I heard it, my own voice, faint and far away, calling out from the woods. "Help! Someone help me!" I froze, my heart hammering. It sounded distorted, like a bad recording, but it was unmistakably me. I grabbed my flashlight and swung the beam toward the trees outside the window. Nothing. The voice came again, weaker this time. I thought about venturing out. My instincts screamed at me to stay inside. I locked the door and spent a restless night listening to the silence. The next morning I met Maya Carter, a hiker in her mid-20s with a backpack nearly her size. She startled me as I was adjusting my solar panels. Her bright smile clashed with the uneasy mood of the forest. "Hey there," she said. "Didn't expect to see anyone else out here. Most people avoid this place." "I'm Everett," I said, extending a hand. "What brings you to Black Hollow?" She explained that she was researching Appalachian folklore for her podcast. Her excitement was infectious, though I found her curiosity a little reckless. When I mentioned the strange silence and the voice, she brushed it off. "Classic auditory hallucination," she said. "Isolation plays tricks on you." That afternoon, we crossed paths with Chris Bennett, a park ranger who seemed to materialize out of the trees. He was gruff and weathered, his sharp eyes scanning the forest like he expected it to attack. "You shouldn't be here," he said bluntly. "Black Hollow isn't safe." "What do you mean?" Maya asked, her curiosity piqued. Chris hesitated, then sighed. "There's something wrong with this place. Call it folklore, call it whatever you want, but people disappear here. I've seen things I can't explain, figures that shouldn't exist. If you're smart, you'll pack up and leave." I should have listened, but pride and curiosity held me back. That night, the forest came alive with terror. Maya and I had set up camp together when the first signs appeared. We found tracks, elongated footprints too large to be human, but shaped like no animal I'd ever seen. They circled the RV and led off into the woods, vanishing mid-trail. Maya snapped photos, excited about the evidence, while I felt an icy weight settle in my chest. Later, as we sat by the fire, Maya gasped. "Everett," she whispered, pointing. At the edge of the clearing stood a figure. Me. It looked like me, down to the jacket I was wearing, but its proportions were wrong. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted unnaturally. The firelight reflected off its eyes, 2 pinpricks of glowing yellow. It didn't move, just stared. "What the hell is that?" Maya whispered. Before I could respond, the thing vanished into the trees, its departure marked by a guttural growl that made my stomach churn. We retreated into the RV, locking the door and killing the lights. The creature prowled outside all night, scratching at the walls and whispering in our voices. By morning, Chris found us, his face grim. "It knows you're here now," he said. "What is it?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Locals call it a skinwalker," Chris said. "It's tied to this land, ancient and vengeful. It thrives on fear, on driving people mad. You can't kill it, but you might be able to keep it at bay." His plan involved fire. We would build a ring of flames around the RV and hold our ground until dawn. "But it won't like that," Chris warned. "It'll fight back." That night, the forest seemed to breathe, the wind carrying voices and the sound of snapping branches. As we lit the fire, the skinwalker revealed its full horror. It no longer bothered with disguises. It stalked the edge of the flames as a grotesque hybrid of man and beast, its face twisted into a permanent snarl. It growled, low and menacing, before lunging at the barrier, only to recoil with a shriek. It didn't stop. It circled the fire endlessly, its form shifting from human to animal to something unrecognizable. The sight was maddening, and I fought to keep my focus. Then it changed tactics. "Everett," it called in Maya's voice. "It's me. I'm hurt. Please help." I looked at her, huddled beside Chris, pale and shaking. "Don't listen," she whispered. Chris suddenly stood, his face blank. "It's calling me," he muttered. "Chris, no." I grabbed his arm, but he shook me off and stepped into the dark. The skinwalker pounced, its claws tearing into him as he screamed. Maya and I watched in horror, unable to do anything. By dawn, the forest was silent again, and the creature was gone. We stumbled back to the edge of the hollow, Chris's sacrifice heavy on our shoulders. His warning stayed with me. Some places aren't meant for us. I abandoned my RV and left Black Hollow, vowing never to return. Maya quit her podcast, too haunted to revisit the story she once sought. To this day, I hear that growl in my nightmares, and I wonder if it's still out there, watching, waiting. If you ever find yourself in Black Hollow, heed this warning. Turn back. Some legends are real, and they hunger. The fog was thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the smell of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as if the forest was holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and the trail I'd heard so much about was hidden somewhere out there, waiting for me. I'd come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating, and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps one locals swore disappeared and reappeared as if it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it, film the mystery, my audience would eat it up. I grabbed my camera, set it up, and filmed a quick introduction. Hey everyone, it's Nate here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and people who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true. I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound my boots crunching on damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pocket just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was anything to the rumors. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore are fun to tell around a campfire, but not much else. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. It wasn't long before I found the first strange marker. A stone slab jutting from the ground, its surface covered in spiraling symbols that didn't look like any language I knew. I filmed it, talking into the camera as I described the find. This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog. I kept moving. The trees closed in tighter and the trail became fainter, more overgrown. Soon, it was little more than a game trail, barely wide enough to follow. I pushed forward, keeping the camera rolling, but after another hour of hiking, the trail simply disappeared. One moment, there had been a clear path. Now, it was gone, swallowed by the forest. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed I was in the middle of nowhere. No path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me, alone, in the fog. Okay, I muttered, you've dealt with worse. I turned back the way I'd come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the undergrowth denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for signs of the trail, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel uneasy. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not mine. I froze. The sound came from deeper in the forest, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just the swirling mist. Then, out of the gloom, a figure emerged. An older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. Hey, I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. You lost too? The man looked at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. He seemed off, his clothes were torn, his face pale, and there was a distant look in his eyes like he wasn't entirely there. I've been walking for days, he said, his voice hoarse. The trail? It keeps changing. Are you okay? I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. No one's okay out here. I frowned, feeling a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. What do you mean? The trail. It moves. I've seen it, watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path, it's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave. I stared at him, my mind racing. This guy was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like the way he was talking. Look, I have a GPS, I said, pulling it out. We can find our way back. The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. It won't help. The forest is messing with it. I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get this guy some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. What had been an open path a moment ago would be choked with brambles. When I looked back, trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Eli, grew more agitated with every passing minute. It's watching us, he muttered. It knows we're here. Who's watching? I asked, growing impatient. The forest, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It's alive, and it's been here long before we were. I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point, it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up, there was nothing but trees. Thick, twisted trees that looked like they had grown there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in on us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind through the leaves, but then more distinct voices calling out from the mist. Nate. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Did you hear that? I asked Eli. He nodded, his eyes wide. It's calling us. The forest. I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just the wind, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, but when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside, water, food, like someone had packed it yesterday. I felt a chill run down my spine. How had it gotten there? Eli was growing more paranoid, his eyes darting around like he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. We need to leave, he kept saying, before it's too late. We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we went, we ended up back where we started. The fog seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The whispers grew louder. Then, without warning, Eli was gone. I turned around and he was just gone. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called out his name, but there was no response, only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. The GPS was useless, and my camera was flickering, showing distorted footage of things I hadn't seen, shadows moving in the trees, figures lurking just out of sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me. The fog was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers were louder now, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement, dark figures moving through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I didn't know what was real anymore. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the edge of the forest, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV and drove, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest a distant memory in the rearview mirror. Back home, I reviewed the footage. I expected to see the horror I'd witnessed, the proof of the vanishing trail and the strange shifting forest. But the videos showed nothing. The trail looked normal, the mist wasn't as thick, and Eli wasn't in the footage at all. It was like he'd never existed. I tried to tell myself it had been a bad trip, that my mind had played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me. And I had a feeling it was waiting somewhere in the mist for me to return. It's funny, the things you think you'll remember about your life and the things that actually stick. For me, it's the smell of sulfur. Not the kind you expect to find in a park, right? But that's the thing. When you work as a ranger, you learn real quick that nature doesn't care what you expect. My name's Felix Doss, and in 2014, I was stationed in the Kluane National Forest in Pennsylvania. It wasn't my first choice. I'd requested Yosemite. Dream big, right? But the budget had other plans for me. Turns out I got more excitement out here than I ever would have in a place with a view like that. I wasn't exactly the outdoorsy type growing up, city boy through and through. But after working a few dead-end jobs, I figured, why not go somewhere with actual fresh air? I thought it would be peaceful, solitude, you know? The kind that gives you space to figure things out. What no one tells you about solitude is that it gives you too much time to think. Eventually, you start hearing things that aren't there, or worse, you hear things that are there. I was on patrol that day, the same route I'd taken dozens of times, hiking the trails, checking the campsites, making sure no one was burning down the forest. I had one of those old walkie-talkies clipped to my belt. Never really worked, but protocol and all. Around mid-afternoon, I reached this spot called Dead Man's Overlook. It's not as morbid as it sounds. Some local legend about a miner who slipped and fell there back in the 1800s. The story never made much sense, but locals clung to it like an heirloom. Tourists loved it too. It's got a view that stretches for miles, thick trees and a river cutting through the valley. Nothing about it screamed danger to me until I saw the smoke. Normally, I'd figure it was some camper with more enthusiasm than skill trying to start a fire, but this smoke was different, thick and dark, like it had an agenda. I picked up the pace, my boots crunching on the dirt path, and radioed back to the station. No reply, of course. When I got closer, the air changed. That sulfur smell hit me hard, like the world had gone rotten. I remember thinking, what the hell is someone burning out here? I followed the scent, more out of curiosity than duty at that point, and it led me to this clearing I didn't recognize. I'd covered the area 100 times, but I'd never seen this spot before. Not once. There was something wrong about the place. The trees were older here, thick and gnarled like they'd seen too much. The clearing was small, just a patch of bare earth surrounded by forest so dense it blocked out the sun. And in the middle of it was a fire, if you could call it that, more like embers glowing in a circle, almost ritualistic. There were bones too, not animal, human. Some looked old, but a few had fresh meat clinging to them, like whoever left them here hadn't finished their work. That's when I heard it. Not a growl, not a roar, more like a scraping sound, like something dragging itself through the underbrush. My first instinct was to call it in, but of course, the walkie was useless. Figures, I crouched low, pulling out the only weapon I had, a standard issue knife. Nothing fancy, but sharp enough to get the job done. As I listened, the sound got closer, more deliberate. I scanned the trees, looking for movement, and that's when I saw it. It moved like a deer, but it sure as hell wasn't one. Too big for one thing, easily 8 feet tall when it stood up on its hind legs. Its body was gaunt, almost skeletal, with skin stretched so tight over its frame that I could see every bone and tendon. The face, if you can call it that, was elongated, with a snout like a wolf, but something about it was off, like a child's drawing of a wolf, exaggerated and wrong. Its mouth was full of teeth that didn't fit together, jagged and uneven, like they'd been shoved in there without care for symmetry. And those legs, God, those legs, they bent backward like a dog's, but longer and more human. It moved fast despite its appearance, low, forward, like it was used to this place, like it owned it. And then it stopped, standing just outside the clearing, watching me with something that felt uncomfortably close to intelligence. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. And for a moment, neither did it. We were locked in some kind of stalemate, both sizing each other up. I've seen wolves before, coyotes too, but this thing wasn't like that. It wasn't hunting for food. It was hunting for sport, maybe even for fun. When it lunged, there, I said it was so fast I barely had time to react. I rolled to the side, slashing at it with my knife. I swear I hit it, but the blade might as well have been a toothpick. It just kept coming. I ran, not my proudest moment, but I wasn't sticking around to see how that thing liked its ranger cooked. I tore through the woods, branches smacking me in the face, my legs burning from the effort. It was close. I could hear it behind me, that same scraping noise getting louder. I had no idea where I was going, just that I had to keep moving. At some point, I broke through the trees and into another part of the forest, somewhere more familiar. I think it was pure luck, honestly. That's when I heard it. Them, actually. Voices. Human voices. I sprinted toward them, stumbling into a campsite where 2 guys were just hanging out, completely oblivious to the nightmare I'd just escaped. They looked at me like I'd lost my mind. And maybe I had. I didn't even try to explain. I just yelled for them to run. One of the guys, a big dude with a beard, looked like he was about to argue, but the sound of that thing crashing through the trees changed his mind real quick. We bolted together, all 3 of us, and I'm not ashamed to admit that one of them outran me. Adrenaline does that to people, I guess. We made it to my truck somehow. I don't remember the details, just the panic and the sheer primal need to get the hell out of there. The thing didn't follow us past the tree line, but I could feel it watching. I know I said I wouldn't mention eyes, but whatever that thing used to track us, it knew we'd gotten away, for now. Back at the station, I tried to file a report. That's protocol, right? I sat down at the desk, staring at the blank page, and realized I had no idea how to describe what had happened. How do you tell someone that the forest, the place you're supposed to protect, just turned on you? that something out there was hunting people and I had no idea how to stop it. I wrote something vague about suspicious activity and left it at that. What else could I do? I wasn't about to throw my career away on a story no one would believe. The next day, I went back to the clearing. I had to. Maybe I thought I could rationalize it, convince myself it had been some weird bear or, I don't know, a trick of the light. But when I got there, the clearing was gone. Not like someone had cleaned it up. Gone, like it had never been there. The trees were just as thick as they'd always been. No signs of a fire, no bones, nothing. I stood there for what felt like an hour, just staring at the spot where I knew I'd seen the bodies. The embers. Then I turned around and walked back to the truck. There wasn't anything else to do. The other guys, I don't know what happened to them after that. They packed up and left the park the next morning. Didn't say much, just gave me this look like they knew something too, but didn't want to talk about it. Can't say I blame them. Some things are better left unsaid. As for me, I put in a transfer request the day after, figured maybe Yosemite wasn't so bad after all. And if anyone ever asks me why I left Allegan, I've got a simple answer ready: bad Wi-Fi. Keeps things light, you know? Plus, it's technically true. The forest around me was too quiet. I'd been sitting by the campfire outside my RV, immersed in the silence for hours, but now something felt off. The kind of off you feel in your gut before your brain catches up to what's happening. No wind. No rustling in the leaves. Just dead stillness. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled up to this remote campsite deep in Mount Hood National Forest. A place like this should have been full of life. Birds, insects, something. But the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of the radio I'd brought along. I needed quiet after everything that had happened over the past year. I wasn't looking for distractions, just isolation. After my wife's death, nothing made sense anymore. People kept telling me I needed to move on, but the noise of life, the sympathy, the well-meaning advice, the friends who didn't know what to say, became unbearable. So I packed up and hit the road, hoping the wilderness would give me space to think, or maybe stop thinking altogether. I thought the forest would help. It had, until now. The radio's static broke the silence, a sudden burst of garbled noise that made me jump. I turned my head toward the RV, where the old ham radio sat inside. I hadn't even touched the thing in hours. It was an antique I'd brought along to mess around with in my downtime, but the signal had been dead all day. No stations, no chatter, nothing. Until now. I stood up from the fire, walked over to the RV, and ducked inside to check the radio. The static was louder, more insistent, like it was trying to form words but couldn't quite get there. I twisted the dials, searching for a clearer signal, but all I got was more white noise. Then, through the crackling, I heard it. A voice, faint and garbled, speaking numbers: 1, 3, 7, 8, 9. The numbers repeated over and over, mechanical and cold, like a voice from an old number station. It didn't make sense. I was miles from anywhere, and this was supposed to be a dead zone. No signal, no interference. The voice paused for a moment, then the numbers started again. 1, 3, 7. It sent a chill through me, but I told myself it was just some rogue signal bouncing off the atmosphere. Maybe a military transmission. There were logical explanations for this kind of thing. I was sure of it. But the way the numbers repeated over and over felt wrong. Like the message wasn't for just anyone. It was for me. I shut the radio off. My fingers were trembling slightly. I wasn't here for this. I needed quiet, not some weird radio signal rattling around in my head. The next day, I tried to forget about the radio. I spent the morning hiking through the woods. The towering pines loomed overhead like silent giants. The air was cool and damp, the sky just a sliver of gray through the dense canopy. But something gnawed at me, a faint buzzing at the back of my mind. No birds, no animals, just silence. When I returned to the campsite, the radio was on again, static blaring from the speakers. I hadn't touched it. I stepped inside the RV, staring at the radio like it might come to life. The static was louder now, more intense. I could feel it in my bones, like the vibration from a low hum in the ground. And beneath the static, the numbers were back. 1, 3, 7, 8. I slammed my hand down on the off switch, killing the sound. My pulse was racing, my mind scrambling for an explanation. It had to be a glitch, Something with the wiring, maybe a stray electrical signal. I'd worked with enough technology over the years to know that things sometimes did strange things when you weren't looking. But the numbers, the way they were so clear, so deliberate, I shook it off and stepped back outside, trying to push the growing unease away. That's when I noticed the man standing at the edge of my campsite. I hadn't heard him approach. He was just there, tall, scruffy, wearing a weathered jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like a camper, but there was something about the way he stood, stiff and tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. "Hey!" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You lost." The man looked at me, his face tight with anxiety. "I heard it too," he said. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Heard what?" "The signal, the numbers," he said, glancing toward the RV. "I've been picking it up on my own radio. It's not normal." My mouth went dry. "You've heard it too?" The man nodded. "I'm Ben," he said, stepping closer, his voice low. "I was camping a few miles down the road. I've been getting static, voices, weird electrical interference. My GPS stopped working as my cell phone drained to zero in minutes." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What do you think it is?" Ben shook his head, his eyes darting toward the trees. "I don't know, but it's not natural. The way the signal moves, it's like it's getting closer." I didn't know how to respond to that. I was a man of logic, of science. Signals were signals, glitches were glitches. But there was something about the way Ben spoke, the fear in his eyes, that made my skin crawl. That night, the radio came to life again. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the campfire and the peaceful silence of the woods, but the static was louder than before. The numbers were clearer, more insistent. 1, 3, 7, 8. Ben was sitting across from me, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. His eyes constantly scanned the dark forest around us. He hadn't relaxed since he showed up, and I couldn't blame him. There was something wrong here, something I couldn't explain. "You think it's some kind of broadcast?" I asked, more to fill the silence than anything. Ben shook his head. "I don't think it's a broadcast at all." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I think it's a warning, or a signal from something out there." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. A warning from what? Before I could ask, the static on the radio cut out for a moment. There was only silence. The kind of silence that presses down on you, that makes your skin prickle with anticipation. Then a sound, a soft rhythmic clicking like something metallic tapping against wood. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, but the beam only revealed darkness. The clicking grew louder, echoing through the forest. And then through the radio, a voice crackled to life. "We see you." My blood ran cold. Ben's eyes widened, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The voice repeated, distorted and mechanical. "We see you." I stood up, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The clicking sound was closer now, coming from all around us, moving through the trees. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, the air growing thick and heavy like the atmosphere itself was alive. "I think we should leave," Ben said, his voice tight with fear. For once, I agreed. The next morning, I found Ben's tent abandoned. His gear was scattered around the clearing, but there was no sign of him, no footprints, no note, just the cold, empty forest and the low hum of static that had settled into the air like a living thing. I tried to follow his tracks, but they vanished in the thick underbrush. It was like he'd walked into the trees and disappeared. The GPS on my phone was useless, spinning me in circles. The battery drained faster than I'd ever seen. The static in my ears grew louder the further I went, like the signal was inside my head, vibrating through my skull. The numbers were back too, repeating over and over, etched into my mind, 1, 3, 7. By midday, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected, an old, dilapidated radio tower hidden deep in the woods. The metal was rusted, vines crawling up the sides, but it was still faintly humming with power. I climbed the tower, every step echoing in the stillness. My heart hammered in my chest. At the top, I found the source of the signal. A small glowing device pulsing with an eerie cold light. It didn't belong here. It wasn't part of the original tower. It was something else, something foreign. I reached out and touched it, and the static in my head exploded. The numbers, the clicking, the voices. It all crashed into me at once, an unbearable cacophony of sound. I stumbled back, nearly falling off the tower as the forest seemed to come alive around me. The lights returned, flickering in the trees, cold and mechanical. The clicking grew louder, more frantic, like something was chasing me. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to the RV, but the lights followed me, the clicking never far behind. But I managed to get inside and slam the door shut. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, the device still clutched in my hand. As I drove away, the static began to fade, but the numbers never left me. They echoed in my mind, a constant whisper, even as the forest disappeared in the rearview mirror. It's been days now, and I'm still hearing them, 137. I can't get them out of my head, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever was out there, whatever sent that signal, knows where I am. And it's not done with me yet. Every hunting trip had its own flavor. Some were filled with excitement and success, while others were exercises in patience and endurance. This one, however, promised to be unique, not because of what I expected to hunt, but because of what I would encounter. Neil Kaplan and I pride ourselves on being keen observers. Growing up in rural Montana taught me the skills I needed to survive and thrive in the wild. I've faced all sorts of predators, from mountain lions to grizzly bears, but nothing prepared me for what I encountered that day. It began like any other hunting trip. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows across the dense forest. I was in the backcountry near Flathead Lake, a place I'd hunted many times before. The air was crisp, and the sounds of the forest waking up provided a comforting backdrop. I was hunting elk, one of the most challenging and rewarding animals to pursue in these parts. Armed with my trusty rifle, a Winchester Model 70, and equipped with all the necessary gear, I set out before dawn to get a head start. I wasn't alone on this trip. My friend, Kevin Santiago, had joined me. He was relatively new to hunting, but his enthusiasm made up for his lack of experience. We split up early in the morning, agreeing to meet back at camp by midday. Kevin headed toward the North Ridge while I chose to explore the denser woods to the east. It wasn't long before I found fresh tracks. I followed them cautiously, staying downwind to avoid alerting the elk. After about an hour of tracking, I came across a small clearing. There, at the far edge, was a large bull elk grazing lazily. I steadied my rifle and took aim, my heart pounding with the thrill of the hunt. Just as I was about to squeeze the trigger, a strange noise caught my attention. It was a low, rumbling sound, almost like a growl, but not quite. The elk looked up, its ears twitching, and then bolted into the trees. Cursing under my breath, I lowered my rifle and scanned the area where the noise had come from. My left, deeper into the forest. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. As I moved closer, the sound grew louder, more distinct. It was unlike anything I'd heard before in the wild. The forest grew thicker, the underbrush denser, making it hard to move quietly, but my instincts told me to press on. After what felt like an eternity, I reached another clearing, smaller this time. In the center, partially hidden by the tall grass, was something that made my blood run cold. It was a carcass, or what was left of one. At first, I thought it was an elk, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person. The body was torn apart, limbs scattered, and the ground soaked with blood. The sight was gruesome enough to make even a seasoned hunter like me feel nauseous. I knelt beside the body, trying to make sense of the scene. There were deep gashes and bite marks too large for any animal I knew. My mind raced, trying to piece together what could have done this. And then I saw the footprints. They were massive, larger than any bear's, and had an unusual pattern, almost reptilian. My first thought was to find Kevin. If there was something this dangerous out here, he needed to know. I retraced my steps as quickly as I could, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and adrenaline. When I reached our agreed meeting spot, Kevin was already there, looking worried. "Neil, thank God. I thought something happened to you," he said, relief evident in his voice. "We need to get out of here," I said, not wanting to waste time with explanations. "There's something in these woods, something dangerous." Kevin's eyes widened and he nodded. We packed up our gear as fast as we could and started making our way back to the truck. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming in the morning, now felt oppressive, each shadow hiding potential danger. As we walked, I filled Kevin in on what I'd seen. He was visibly shaken, but he kept his composure. "Do you think it's some kind of animal?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But whatever it is, it's not something we want to meet." We moved quickly, trying to make as little noise as possible. The forest seemed eerily silent, as if every creature was hiding from whatever monster lurked in the shadows. We were about halfway to the truck when we heard it again, the same low rumbling sound. We froze, trying to pinpoint its location. It was close, too close. Kevin motioned for us to keep moving, but we hadn't gone far when we saw it. At the edge of a thicket, partially obscured by the underbrush, was the creature. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Standing on two legs, it was at least 7 feet tall, covered in thick, matted fur. Its head was vaguely canine, with a long snout and sharp teeth that glinted in the dappled sunlight. But its eyes were what truly terrified me. They were intelligent, almost human, and filled with a malevolent hunger. Kevin raised his rifle, but I stopped him. "Don't shoot," I whispered. "We don't know if it'll kill it or just make it mad." The creature sniffed the air, its gaze fixed on us. Then, with terrifying speed, it charged. We bolted, running through the forest, branches whipping at our faces. The creature was fast, much faster than us. I could hear its heavy footsteps gaining on us, feel the ground shake with each stride. We burst into another clearing, and I turned, hoping to get a clear shot. But the creature was already upon us. It swiped at Kevin, knocking him to the ground. I fired my rifle, the shot echoing through the trees. The bullet hit the creature, but it barely flinched. Kevin scrambled to his feet, blood streaming from a gash on his arm. We ran again, but the creature was relentless. It was toying with us, letting us think we had a chance before closing in for the kill. In a desperate move, I grabbed a flare from my pack and ignited it, throwing it at the creature. The bright light seemed to confuse it, giving us a few precious seconds to gain some distance. We ran toward a rocky outcrop, hoping to find some kind of shelter. The creature followed, but slower now, wary of the flares I kept throwing behind us. We reached the rocks and climbed up, finding a narrow ledge to hide on. The creature circled below, its eyes never leaving us. It let out a sound, a mix of a howl and a roar that sent chills down my spine. It was calling for something, and I dreaded to think what. Minutes felt like hours as we waited, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The creature eventually wandered off, but I knew it was still close, waiting for us to come down. We had no choice but to wait, hoping it would lose interest. As dusk approached, the forest began to come alive with the sounds of nocturnal animals. The creature, however, remained silent. Kevin and I exchanged glances, knowing we couldn't stay on the ledge all night. We needed a plan. "We have to make a run for the truck," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's our only chance." Kevin nodded, his face pale but determined. We climbed down as quietly as we could and started moving again. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made my heart race. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees twisting into ominous shapes in the fading light. We were almost there, the truck just visible through the trees, when the creature attacked again. It leapt from the shadows, knocking Kevin to the ground. I turned and fired, the shot hitting it square in the chest. This time it howled in pain, but it didn't stop. It lunged at me, its claws ripping through my jacket. I stumbled back, reloading as quickly as I could. Kevin was back on his feet, bleeding, but still fighting. He swung his rifle like a club, hitting the creature with all his strength. It snarled and swiped at him, but he managed to dodge, barely. I fired again, aiming for its head. The bullet hit its mark and the creature fell, thrashing on the ground. It let out one final, ear-piercing scream before going still. Kevin and I stood there, panting, staring at the lifeless body. "Is it dead?" Kevin asked, his voice shaking. "I think so," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure. We approached cautiously, ready to run if it moved, but it didn't. The creature lay there, a grotesque reminder of the day's events. We didn't waste any more time. We got to the truck and drove out of there, not looking back. The forest that had once been a place of solace and adventure was now tainted by the memory of that creature. Back in town, we reported what had happened to the authorities. They were skeptical, of course, but when they saw the body and the footprints, they had no choice but to take us seriously. The news spread quickly, and soon the area was swarming with researchers and reporters. Kevin and I tried to move on, but the encounter had changed us. We still went hunting, but we were more cautious, more aware of the dangers that lurked in the wild. That day had been a stark reminder that no matter how much we think we know about the world, there are always things out there that can surprise us, things that defy explanation. In the end, we never found out what the creature was or where it had come from. Some things, it seems, are destined to remain mysteries, lurking in the shadows, waiting to be discovered by those brave or foolish enough to seek them out. My name is Liam Campbell, and in the summer of 2009, I found myself in the thick of the Okapi National Wildlife Refuge, right on the Georgia-Florida line. Now, if you've ever been there, you know Okapi has that swampy, steamy vibe that feels like it hasn't changed in centuries. And yeah, it's as fun to trudge through as it sounds. My buddies back in Montana thought I was nuts for signing up for this search and rescue gig out here, especially in a place most folks don't go, even if they're paid to. But when you're pushing 50 and your back ain't quite what it used to be, desk jobs start looking like the last lifeline. I thought this was the perfect blend. Some paperwork, some patrols, nothing too intense. Except I was wrong. Way wrong. One August morning, just as the day was heating up, I got a call about a missing man. His wife reported him after he didn't make it back to their RV at one of the designated camping spots near the swamp's edge. Frankly, I figured it was one of those cases where the guy decided to take a longer than planned fishing trip, or maybe got a little turned around. Happens a lot. But when I grabbed my gear, I couldn't shake this snagging feeling, like a prickling at the back of my neck. I blamed it on lack of sleep, and maybe a slight hangover from the night before. I headed to the swamp with the junior ranger, John Alaskan, fresh out of whatever nature program he crawled from, all wide-eyed and eager. As we pushed through the thick underbrush, he kept spouting off stats about Okapi's wildlife like I'd signed up for a swamp tour, gators, herons, rattlers. He had facts about them all. Great kid, but enthusiasm wasn't what we needed out here. About an hour in, we found the man's backpack snagged on a tree branch, half submerged in mud. Nothing too alarming until I saw the way it was hanging like it had been torn or ripped. The swamp had this eerie quiet about it. It wasn't just the absence of birds or bugs. It was a dead silence that crawled under your skin. I muttered to John to keep his voice down, though I didn't really know why. Guess instinct has a funny way of making itself known when you need it. By noon, we were deep into the cypress trees. Spanish moss dripped down like some kind of haunted tinsel, and the place had an otherworldly feeling, like stepping back in time. That's when we saw it, the body, or what was left of it. Half in the water, mangled like a rag doll, and yet somehow not quite lifelike. His face was a mess of scratches, and his shirt, shredded beyond repair, clung to his torso. John went pale. I could see him trying to keep it together, but his breath came short and fast like he was about to hurl. I wanted to tell him this was the worst of it, that this was the thing we'd tell ghost stories about later, but then I saw the marks. Now, I've seen what gators can do to a person, and this wasn't a gator. Whatever did this to the man had left puncture marks all over his legs and shoulders, too far apart for any known creature in these swamps. It looked like a set of jaws, but there was something off. Like the bite pattern was trying to mimic a crocodile, but bigger. Way bigger. And the teeth weren't rounded like a gator's. They were more jagged, like a saw had chewed him up. John had stopped breathing altogether, just staring. I nudged him to snap out of it, reminding him that we needed to report back. We didn't have our radios with us, signals don't get through most of this area, so we planned to hit one of the nearby ranger stations and call it in. I told John we'd need to document the scene, but he shook his head, mumbling something about this being wrong, that we shouldn't be here. I admit I wasn't keen to stick around either, but protocol's protocol. So I pulled out my camera to snap a few shots. Just as I was focusing, a rustle sounded from behind John, and I froze. I could feel his panic building up like a pressure cooker beside me. We turned around slowly, and that's when we saw it, or part of it. The creature was half submerged in the swamp water, but I could see the top of its skull, a thick, bony ridge that reminded me of an old snapping turtle, only 10 times the size. Its skin was mottled and dark, camouflaging with the muddy water, but when it moved, I saw something that looked like scales. It didn't move fast, more like it was studying us, calculating. I'd never seen anything like it. John whispered something about getting out of there, and I agreed, but I wasn't about to turn my back on this thing. We stepped back slowly, trying to keep our movement smooth. It tracked us, eyes following every step, head slightly tilted like it was waiting. I kept my camera down, afraid the flash might set it off. It was like a standoff, us on the muddy bank, it half hidden in the swamp water. Out of nowhere, it lunged forward. Not fast, not charging. Just a quick lurch that covered a terrifying amount of ground. It revealed more of itself, a hulking mass, bigger than any croc I'd ever seen, but with limbs more suited to dragging through the mud. Its mouth was a gaping cavern, and I swear I caught a whiff of rotten mud. That was enough for John, who bolted like a rabbit. I couldn't blame him, though I wasn't far behind. We tore through the swamp, stumbling over roots and wading through knee-deep water, every nerve screaming to keep moving. But the thing was moving too, a slow but relentless pursuit. I could hear it closing behind us, and there was this low sound, a wet scraping, like claws dragging through the muck. We burst onto a small clearing, and I felt a glimmer of hope when I saw one of the old, rickety observation towers made for bird watchers or brave souls who wanted a better view of the swamp. It stood barely taller than the trees, but it was something. I gestured at John, and we climbed, scrambling up the wooden steps as fast as our legs would carry us. The tower shook under our weight, and I half expected it to collapse, but it held. We were maybe 15 feet up when we looked down and saw the creature circling. It glared up at us, that hulking form now fully visible in the dim light filtering through the swamp. Its body was thick, covered in layers of rough, mud-caked skin that looked like armor. It had huge limbs, like it was built for wading but not running. John kept mumbling to himself, rocking back and forth on the narrow platform. I scanned the swamp, hoping for any sign of rescue, but I knew it was a fool's hope. This place was a dead zone, a quiet void where no one would find us until the next patrol. The thing lunged at the tower, sending a jolt through the wood. It didn't seem able to climb, but it kept ramming its body against the supports, each impact sending a bone-shaking tremor up to where we clung. I thought about pulling out my knife, but what good was that against something that looked like it could snap me in half? After what felt like an eternity, it finally gave up, slinking back into the water, leaving only a trail of broken branches and trampled mud. John and I stayed up there, waiting for the sounds to fade, hearts pounding in sync with the swamp's eerie quiet. Finally, we dared to climb down, legs wobbly, knees buckling with every step. We made it back to the ranger station, silent and shaken, hardly exchanging a word. John's eyes were hollow, like he'd left something out there in the swamp. The rescue team found the man's body, but they dismissed our creature report as a mistaken encounter with an alligator. I didn't argue. No one wants to believe something like that's out there. But late one night, weeks later, I dug through some old files and found a reference to an okapi giant. Old stories, folklore mostly, about something lurking in the swamp that wasn't quite alligator, not quite anything else either. Maybe some ancient survivor of a forgotten age. We never saw it again, but when I think back to that hot August day in 2009, all I can remember is the sound of it dragging itself through the mud, that hungry, calculating gaze locked on us, and the way it moved. Not fast, but sure.